Hello, Mr. Hex family. Sorry for the long intro and thank you so much for being here. I want to be honest with you. My videos, thumbnails, editing style, and titles are being copied by other channels, and this has affected my channel and slowed my growth. Because of that, I created a new channel where I will focus on better stories, improved editing, and higher quality content. If you enjoy my work, please support me by subscribing. The link is in the pinned comment below. Thank you for your support. And now let's begin today's story. My name is Kennedy Blackwater, and I've been a ranger at Chattahoochee National Forest for 12 years. My grandmother used to say our family name came from the dark waters that run through these mountains, waters that remember things the world has forgotten. I never paid much attention to her stories until the night everything changed. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. Two hikers, Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez, had failed to return from the Raven Cliffs Trail. They'd signed in at the trailhead that morning, planning a day hike to the falls and back. Now, 13 hours later, the temperature was dropping fast, and a storm system was moving in from the west. I grabbed my gear from the ranger station, the familiar weight of my pack settling across my shoulders like an old friend. My hands moved automatically, checking supplies, first aid kit, emergency blankets, flares, radio, GPS unit. But before heading out, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the small leather pouch my grandmother had given me on my 18th birthday, filled with tobacco and sage, tied with a strip of deerskin. For protection, she'd said then, her weathered hands pressing it into mine. The old things still walk these woods, Kanati. They remember the treaties we've forgotten. I'd kept it out of respect for her, not belief. But tonight, something made me tuck it into my chest pocket, close to my heart. The forest at night is a different world. During the day, the Chattahoochee is beautiful. Rhododendron thickets, towering oaks and pines, creeks that sing over moss-covered stones. But in darkness it transforms. Shadows eat the familiar paths. Every sound carries weight and meaning. Your flashlight beam becomes a lifeline, the only thing standing between you and the consuming dark. I started up the Raven Cliffs Trail, my boots finding the rhythm I'd developed over thousands of hours in these woods. The beam of my headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating the red blazes that marked the path. October had been unusually warm, but tonight the temperature had plummeted. My breath came out in small clouds that dissipated in the beam of light. About 2 miles in, I found the first sign of them, a granola bar wrapper caught on a branch just off the trail. I examined it carefully, fresh, no moisture damage. They'd been here within the last few hours. I called out, my voice seeming small against the vast darkness. "Sarah! Marcus! This is Ranger Blackwater. Can you hear me?" The forest swallowed my words. But something else answered. It started as a feeling, that primitive awareness that you're being watched. The tiny hairs on my neck stood up. I've encountered black bears, coyotes, even a mountain lion once. This was different. This was older. Then came the smell. It hit me like a physical force. Musky, wild, with an underlying scent of decay that made my stomach turn. It was animal, but wrong somehow. Too strong, too close. I swept my light in a slow circle, hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no rustling leaves. Even the ever-present whisper of wind through the pines had stopped. In 12 years of ranging, I'd never experienced such absolute quiet. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw the print. It was pressed deep into the soft earth beside the trail, partially obscured by fallen leaves. My light trembled slightly as I knelt beside it. The print was enormous, at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, human-shaped but wrong. The toes were too long, too spread. The heel dug deep, suggesting incredible weight. My rational mind tried to explain it away. A bear print distorted by rain. A hoax. But my grandmother's voice whispered in my memory, "The Nanahe still walk these mountains, grandson. The Cherokee knew them. The white men call them other names now." A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness to my left. Close. Too close. I stood slowly, every nerve screaming danger. My radio crackled with static, then went dead. The GPS screen flickered and went dark. Even my flashlight dimmed, the beam struggling against a darkness that seemed almost physical. Then I heard it. A sound that would haunt me forever. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, a rumbling that I felt in my chest more than heard. It rose slowly, building to something between a howl and a scream that no human throat could produce. It was pain and rage and loneliness, all mixed into one terrible sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My body wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee back down the trail to safety. But Sarah and Marcus were out here somewhere, and I'd taken an oath. Plus something deeper held me in place. Call it ancestry, call it duty, or call it the stubborn refusal to abandon those who needed help. I forced myself to breathe slowly, the way my grandmother had taught me when I was young and afraid of thunderstorms. I touched the pouch in my pocket and spoke words I barely remembered in Cherokee, a prayer for protection and guidance. The oppressive feeling lifted slightly. My flashlight brightened. The forest sounds returned gradually. First the wind, then the gentle rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Whatever had been there was gone, or at least no longer focused on me. I pressed on up the trail, but everything had changed. This was no longer just a search and rescue mission. Something ancient stirred in these woods, something that predated the Park Service, the Cherokee, perhaps even humanity itself. And somewhere in this darkness, two innocent hikers were lost, unaware of what shared the forest with them. As I climbed higher into the mountains, following traces of Sarah and Marcus's passage, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being allowed to proceed, that whatever walked these woods had evaluated me and, for now, decided I could pass. But I knew with cold certainty that this permission could be revoked at any moment. The trail grew steeper as I pushed deeper into the forest. My GPS had flickered back to life, showing me 3 miles from the trailhead, but the signal kept cutting in and out. Sarah and Marcus would have made it to Raven Cliffs Falls by midday. It was only a 5-mile hike. Something had gone wrong on their return journey. I found their second sign near a creek crossing. A water bottle, expensive brand, still half full. No one leaves water behind unless they're in trouble or in a hurry. The bottle lay in the middle of the trail, as if dropped in haste. I examined the ground carefully. Their boot prints were there. Sarah's smaller hiking boots with a distinctive star pattern on the sole. Marcus's larger ones with deep treads. But they weren't alone. The massive prints I'd found earlier appeared again, this time multiple sets, circling the area where the hikers had stopped. Some overlapped their boot prints, meaning whatever made them had come after. The pattern suggested stalking behavior, staying just outside the range of vision, circling, evaluating. I keyed my radio, hoping for a signal. Base, this is Blackwater. I've found signs of the missing hikers approximately 3 miles up Raven Cliffs Trail. Continuing search. Static answered me, then nothing. I was on my own. The wind picked up, bringing that smell again. Wild musk mixed with something else. Fear. Human fear has a distinct scent, sharp and acrid. It clung to the area like invisible fog. My grandmother once told me that violent emotions could leave impressions in places, especially in the old forests where the veil between worlds was thin. I called out again. Sarah, Marcus, Park Service, make some noise if you can hear me. This time something answered. Not a voice, a knocking sound. 3 deliberate raps against wood, coming from somewhere up the slope to my right. It repeated. Knock, knock, knock. Rhythmic, intentional. Every ranger knows that sound. We've all heard the stories, dismissed them around campfires, laughed them off in the bright light of day. Wood knocking, tree knocking, one of the classic signs reported by those who claim to have encountered. I pushed the thought away. This was a rescue mission, not a cryptozoology expedition. But when I swept my light toward the sound, I saw them. Eyes, at least 8 feet off the ground, reflecting my light with an amber glow. They didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, they vanished. No sound of movement, no rustling of leaves. There one moment, gone the next. I forced myself to continue up the trail, but my hand stayed on my bear spray. The knocking followed me, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, always staying just out of sight. It was being answered now, similar knocks from different directions. Communication, coordination. Near the 4-mile mark, I found where Sarah and Marcus had left the trail. Their prints veered sharply into the forest, heading downslope through thick rhododendron. No experienced hiker leaves the trail without good reason, especially as darkness approaches. They'd been driven off. I followed their path, pushing through the dense undergrowth. The rhododendron formed a tunnel, branches catching at my pack, leaves rustling with every movement. The prints told a story of panic, long strides, occasional falls marked by disturbed earth and broken branches, and always those other prints followed, keeping pace. Then I found the blood. Not much, just a smear on a broken branch at about shoulder height. Fresh enough to still be tacky. I tested it with my field kit, human. One of them was injured. The trail became easier to follow after that, droplets of blood marking their passage like breadcrumbs. The rhododendron opened into a small clearing dominated by an enormous oak tree, ancient and gnarled. This was one of the old giants that had somehow escaped the logging that claimed most of the virgin forest. The Cherokee would have known this tree, might have considered it sacred. At the base of the tree, huddled between two massive roots, were Sarah and Marcus. They were alive but in bad shape. Marcus had a gash on his forehead, blood matted in his dark hair. Sarah clutched a makeshift club, a broken branch about 3 feet long. Both were wide-eyed with terror, pressed as far back into the protective embrace of the oak's roots as they could get. "It's okay," I said softly, not wanting to startle them further. "I'm Ranger Blackwater. I'm here to help." Sarah's club lowered slightly. They wouldn't let us leave," she whispered. "Every time we tried to get back to the trail, they'd be there, throwing things, making those sounds." "How many?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. 3, maybe 4. Marcus's voice was shaky. "Big, so big. We thought they were people at first, in costumes, but the way they moved." He trailed off, shuddering. I helped Marcus to his feet, checking his head wound. It was superficial but needed cleaning. Sarah seemed uninjured physically, though both showed clear signs of shock and exhaustion. I gave them water and energy bars, keeping my voice calm and professional. "We're going to get you out of here," I said. "Can you walk?" They nodded, but Sarah grabbed my arm. "They're still out there, watching." They never stopped watching. As if in response, a low whistle came from the darkness beyond the clearing. It was answered by another, then another. They were communicating, planning. The sound raised every hair on my body. I pulled out the leather pouch from my pocket, surprising myself with the action. Opening it, I scattered a small amount of tobacco around us in a circle, whispering the old words my grandmother had taught me. A offering. A request for safe passage. Marcus and Sarah watched with wide eyes, but said nothing. In that moment, faced with the impossible, even the skeptical grasp for any protection, the whistling stopped. The forest held its breath again, but this time it felt different. Expectant rather than threatening. I helped Marcus to his feet, supporting him on one side while Sarah took the other. "Stay close," I instructed. "No matter what you see or hear, keep moving. Don't run unless I tell you to. And whatever you do, don't look back." We began our journey out of the clearing, 3 small humans in a vast darkness that suddenly felt very crowded. And though I kept my eyes forward as I'd instructed the others, I could feel them all around us. Watching, waiting, testing. We moved through the forest in a tight group, Marcus leaning heavily on Sarah and me. Every few steps I'd sweep my flashlight in an arc, checking our surroundings. The massive shapes stayed just beyond the reach of the light, shadows among shadows, but their presence was undeniable. The journey back to the trail should have taken 20 minutes. It took us an hour. They herded us like sheep. When I tried to lead us directly upslope to the trail, a massive pine cone struck the ground inches from my feet, thrown with impossible force from somewhere in the canopy. When we adjusted course, branches would snap in warning. They were directing us, but where? "Why don't they just attack?" Sarah whispered. It was a good question. Whatever these beings were, they clearly had the physical advantage. They could have overwhelmed us at any time. Instead, they seemed to be testing us, or perhaps testing me specifically. Every time I touched the medicine pouch in my pocket, the pressure would ease slightly. Marcus stumbled, going down to one knee with a grunt of pain. As we helped him up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The boot prints we'd been following, our own trail back, had been deliberately obscured, leaves scattered over them, branches laid across the path. They didn't want us to leave. Not yet. "Change of plans," I said quietly. "We're going to shelter until dawn." "Are you insane?" Sarah's voice cracked. "We need to get out of here. They're not going to let us. Not in the dark, not on their terms." I helped Marcus to a large boulder formation I'd noticed earlier. It offered protection on 3 sides, with an overhang that would shelter us from rain. More importantly, it put our backs against something solid. As we settled in, I pulled out my emergency supplies. Chemical light sticks, emergency blankets, first aid kit. I cleaned Marcus's head wound properly, using butterfly bandages to close the gash. Sarah hugged her knees to her chest, eyes constantly scanning the darkness. "Tell me what happened," I said, needing information but also hoping conversation would help keep them calm. Marcus spoke first, his voice steadier now. "We made it to the falls around noon, had lunch, took photos, normal day. On the way back, maybe around 3 o'clock, we started noticing things, sounds following us. Rocks flying out of nowhere. We thought it was teenagers playing pranks," Sarah added. "Until we saw one." She shuddered at the memory. "It was standing in the middle of the trail, just standing there. At first I thought it was a really tall hiker in dark clothes, but then it turned its head, and the proportions were all wrong. Too wide, arms too long, and the face, not human," Marcus finished. "Not quite ape either, something in between. Intelligent. It looked at us like it was making a decision." "Then what?" I prompted. "It screamed, that horrible sound. We ran." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "They chased us off the trail, kept us moving for hours. Every time we tried to double back, they'd be there. It was like they were playing with us." I activated 2 chemical light sticks, placing them at the edges of our shelter. The green glow wouldn't travel far, but it would give us some warning if anything approached. Then I did something that surprised even me. I began to sing. It was an old Cherokee song my grandmother had taught me, one for protection and safe travels. My voice was rusty, I hadn't sung it in years, but the words came back like muscle memory. Sarah and Marcus fell silent, listening. The forest listened too. The constant sense of being watched intensified, but the threatening edge softened. When I finished, there was a long moment of absolute silence. Then from somewhere in the darkness came an answer. Not in Cherokee, not in any language I recognized, but unmistakably a response. Deep, resonant notes that seemed to come from multiple throats, harmonizing in ways human voices couldn't achieve. It was hauntingly beautiful and utterly alien. What was that?" Sarah breathed. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think we just passed some kind of test." The rest of the night passed strangely. The creatures, I couldn't deny what they were anymore, maintained their perimeter but came no closer. Occasionally, we'd catch glimpses of them in the chemical light, massive shapes covered in dark fur, moving with impossible grace for their size. Eyes that held too much intelligence. Around 3 in the morning, something changed. The watchers pulled back, their presence fading until only one remained. I could feel it out there, different from the others. Older, maybe. More powerful, certainly. Then it spoke, not in words exactly. The sound was like wind through caves, like water over rocks, shaped into something almost like speech. But somehow, I understood. It was asking a question, asking who I was. Without thinking, I stood and spoke my full name in Cherokee, adding my grandmother's clan name. I told the darkness that I was a protector of this forest, as my ancestors had been protectors of the land, that these people were under my care. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then, slowly, I heard movement. Not approaching, but withdrawing. The presence faded like mist before sun. Whatever test we'd faced, we'd passed. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, I helped Sarah and Marcus to their feet. They were exhausted but mobile. The forest looked normal again, just trees and rocks and morning mist. But the massive footprints remained, proof that the night's terrors had been real. We made it back to the trail without incident. The path that had been blocked and obscured in darkness was clear in the morning light. 2 hours later, we emerged at the trailhead where paramedics were waiting. I'd managed to get a radio signal once we were lower on the mountain. As Sarah and Marcus were loaded into the ambulance, Sarah gripped my hand. "Those things, what were they?" I thought about lying, about giving her the official response about bears or hysteria brought on by fear and exhaustion. Instead, I told her the truth. "Old," I said. "Older than the Park Service, older than America. They were here first." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Will they hurt others? I don't think so. Not if people respect the forest. Not if they don't push too deep into the old places. I squeezed her hand gently. Stay on the trails, leave before dark, and always, always listen when the forest tells you to go. As the ambulance pulled away, I stood alone in the parking area, looking back at the forest. Morning sun painted the peaks gold, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Beautiful, peaceful, deceptive. I touched the medicine pouch still in my pocket. Tonight I'd call my grandmother. There were things I needed to learn, stories I should have listened to years ago. Because Sarah and Marcus weren't the first to go missing in these woods, and they wouldn't be the last. And somewhere in those ancient hills, the first inhabitants watched and waited. Judges of every human who dared enter their domain. We were all trespassers here, tolerated at their discretion. I'd been given a pass. This time, 3 days after the incident with Sarah and Marcus, I was back on duty. The official report mentioned severe weather disorientation and a minor head injury. No mention of anything else. My supervisor, Chief Ranger Patricia Holstead, had given me a long look when I submitted it but said nothing. She'd been ranging for 30 years. She knew there were things in these woods that didn't fit in official reports. I'd spent those 3 days visiting my grandmother on the reservation. She'd listened to my story without interruption, nodding occasionally, her weathered hands working on beadwork as I spoke. "The Nunhi have always been here," she said when I finished. "The Cherokee knew to respect them, to leave offerings, to avoid their sacred places. But that knowledge has been lost. Now people traipse through their homeland like it's a playground." She'd taught me more songs, more prayers, showed me how to properly prepare the medicine bundle. And she'd given me a warning that chilled me to the bone. "They showed themselves to you for a reason, Kanati. Change is coming to the forest. They're trying to decide if any humans can be trusted to help protect what's left." Now back in uniform and patrolling the trails, her words echoed in my mind. The forest felt different. Not threatening exactly, but watchful. I found myself noticing things I'd overlooked before. Ancient markers, subtle trail systems that didn't appear on any map, trees that had clearly been shaped by intelligence rather than nature. It was near sunset when I got the call. Another hiker missing, this time on the Bear Hair Trail. But this was different. The missing person was Dr. Raymond Ashford, a wildlife biologist who'd been conducting research in the park for the past month, and he'd been specifically looking for evidence of undocumented primate activity. I found his camp 2 miles off the main trail, in an area that made my skin crawl the moment I entered it. The trees here were wrong, too evenly spaced, too uniform in size. This wasn't natural forest. This was a garden, their garden. Ashford's tent was intact but empty. His equipment was scattered around the campsite. Cameras, recording devices, plaster for taking casts of footprints. His laptop was still open, the battery dead. But it was his research notes that made my heart sink. He'd been tracking them, systematically. He had photographs, blurry but unmistakable. He had sound recordings, footprint casts, even what looked like hair samples. Worse, he had maps marking what he called habituation sites and territorial boundaries. He'd been treating them like animals to be studied. A twig snapped behind me. I turned to find Dr. Ashford standing at the edge of the camp. But something was wrong. His clothes were intact but disheveled. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He moved stiffly, like a marionette with tangled strings. "Dr. Ashford, I'm Ranger Blackwater. Are you injured?" He tilted his head at an unnatural angle, studying me. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "They want you to understand. You're the bridge." "Who wants me to understand? Where have you been?" "Deeper than maps go, older than human memory." He moved closer, and I could see his pupils were dilated to the point where his eyes looked black. "They showed me what's coming. Development, logging, the old agreement broken." My hand moved to my radio, but Ashford shook his head. "No others, just you. You have the blood, you have the sight. They tested you with the lost ones. You passed. Dr. Ashford, you need medical attention. Let me help you." He laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was deeper, resonating in frequencies that human throats shouldn't produce. This one wanted to expose us, to bring more humans, more cameras, more intrusion. We showed him the consequence of breaking the treaty. "The treaty? Your ancestors knew. Some still remember. Leave the high places alone. Take only what the forest offers freely. Honor the old ways." His head tilted again, but now they come with machines. They plan to build where the ancient trees grow. They planned to cut roads through the heart of our territory. I'd heard rumors about a proposed development project, luxury cabins and expanded trail systems. The Forest Service had been fighting it, but political pressure was mounting. "So stop them," I said. "You have that power." Ashford's face contorted into something that might have been a smile. "Stop them? Like we stopped the ones before? The missing ones whose bones feed the old trees? No, that way leads to war. And in war, everyone loses." He moved to his equipment, picking up a camera. With inhuman strength, he crushed it in his hand. "No evidence, no proof. Let us remain myth. It's safer for everyone." "Then what do you want from me?" "Be our voice. You walk both worlds. Speak for the forest in your councils. Protect the boundaries." He stepped closer, and for a moment I saw something else looking out through his eyes. Ancient, powerful, alien. "Or we will protect them ourselves, and our ways are not gentle." Ashford's body suddenly convulsed. He fell to his knees, retching. When he looked up, his eyes were normal again, filled with very human terror. "Oh God," he gasped. "Oh God, what did they... I can't... the things they showed me." I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. He was in shock, babbling incoherently about underground cities, about a civilization that predated humanity, about bargains made and broken. I guided him back to the trail, calling for medical evacuation. As we waited for the helicopter, he gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Destroy my research," he begged. "All of it. Don't let anyone know. They're not animals. They're so much more. And they're angry. So angry about what's coming." The helicopter arrived, and I watched them load him in. He'd never be the same. Whatever he'd experienced had broken something fundamental in his mind. Before they flew away, he met my eyes one last time. "The Ranger," he said clearly. "You're the one they chose. Don't fail them. Don't fail us all." I spent the rest of the night at his campsite, building a fire and feeding it with every piece of his research. Photos, notes, recordings. All of it turned to ash and smoke. As the last notebook burned, I heard it again, that otherworldly song, coming from all directions. But this time I heard something new in it: gratitude and warning. When dawn came, I hiked out with Ashford's empty pack. I'd file a report about a researcher who'd suffered a psychological break, possibly from a hallucinogenic plant or mushroom. His wild claims would be attributed to delirium. The forest would keep its secrets. But I knew the truth. And I knew my role now. I was a ranger, yes, but I was also something more. A guardian. A bridge between worlds that should never have met but now had no choice but to coexist. The old treaties my grandmother spoke of were real, and they were failing. Something was coming. Something that would force the hidden ones into the open. And when that happened, I would need to choose a side. Looking at the ancient forest around me, at the mist rising through trees that had stood for centuries, the choice seemed obvious. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. It never was. 2 months passed. 2 months of strange dreams where I ran through forests that existed before human memory, where massive shapes taught me wordless songs of power and protection. 2 months of finding offerings at trail markers, bundles of herbs, carved stones, feathers from birds that shouldn't exist in these mountains. 2 months of being watched, tested, prepared. The development proposal had gained momentum. Blackstone Industries wanted to build a luxury resort complex deep in the national forest, complete with roads, cabins, and hiking trails that would cut directly through what I now knew were sacred territories. The Forest Service was fighting it, but money was talking louder than conservation. I'd done what I could through official channels: environmental impact reports, indigenous heritage claims, endangered species documentation. But Blackstone had lawyers, lobbyists, and most importantly, they had already begun sending survey teams into the forest. 3 survey teams had gone missing so far. The first team simply vanished. Their equipment was found neatly stacked at their base camp, but the 4 surveyors were gone without a trace. The second team was found 3 days after they disappeared, wandering the forest in a state similar to Dr. Ashford, physically unharmed but psychologically shattered, babbling about impossible cities and ancient eyes. Parts of the third team were found. That's when they called me in. Not as a ranger, but as someone who understood the local situation. Chief Holstead had recommended me, knowing more than she ever let on. The meeting was held in a conference room at the district headquarters, fluorescent lights harsh after weeks under forest canopy. Present were 2 Blackstone executives, a team of private security contractors, and surprisingly my grandmother. She sat quietly in the corner, her presence unexplained but unchallenged. Ranger Blackwater, the lead executive, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Crenshaw, began. We understand you have unique expertise regarding the indigenous population of this area. I almost laughed. Indigenous population. If only they knew how right and how wrong they were. The Cherokee Nation's position on the development has been clear, I said carefully. We're not talking about the Cherokee, Crenshaw replied, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, blurry, distant, but unmistakable. They'd captured images of the forest's true guardians. We're talking about these. I studied the photos with feigned surprise. These could be misidentified bears, shadows, pareidolia. Cut the shit, one of the security contractors interrupted, a hard-faced man with military bearing. We've lost 7 people. We've seen the footprints, heard the sounds. Something's out there, and it doesn't want us in that forest. We need to know what we're dealing with. I glanced at my grandmother. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. What you're dealing with, I said slowly, is a species that has lived in these mountains since before humans walked upright. They're intelligent, organized, and they consider that land sacred. You cannot build there. Cannot? Crenshaw's voice was ice. This is America. We have legal rights to that land. Your laws mean nothing to them. My grandmother spoke for the first time, her voice carrying an authority that filled the room. You're talking about breaking a treaty older than your constitution. The security contractor leaned forward. How many are there? What are their capabilities? How do we neutralize the threat? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The fluorescent lights flickered. And suddenly, we weren't alone. It didn't come through the door, it was simply there, filling the corner of the room opposite my grandmother. 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. The smell, earth and musk and ancient forests, overwhelmed the sterile office air. Everyone froze, prey instinct taking over. Everyone except my grandmother and me. The being looked at each person in turn, its eyes, so terribly intelligent, evaluating, judging. When it spoke, the sound bypassed the ears and resonated directly in our minds. The old woman speaks truth. The agreement stands. Build elsewhere, or face the consequences of treaty breaking. Crenshaw, to her credit, found her voice first. What are you? We are the first. We are the keepers. We were here when your ancestors were still learning to use fire. This land is ours by right of first claim and sacred duty. The security contractor's hand moved toward his weapon. The being's head turned toward him and he froze mid-motion. Violence? In a place of talking? You prove why your kind cannot be trusted. Wait. I stood, moving between them. Please, let me speak for them. They don't understand. They've forgotten the old ways. Those ancient eyes turned to me. You have learned much, Bridgewalker. But some lessons must be taught directly. The room changed. Reality flickered like a bad film splice. We were no longer in the conference room, but standing in a vast forest. Not the forest as it was now, but as it had been. Massive trees that dwarfed redwoods, clear streams that sang with power, air that tasted of magic and possibility. This was our charge, the voice continued. To preserve the sacred groves, to maintain the balance. Your kind promised to respect the boundaries, but you forget. You always forget. The vision shifted. I saw the forest shrinking, pushed back by roads and cities. I saw the sacred places desecrated, the old trees felled. I saw the keepers retreating deeper and deeper, their numbers dwindling, their purpose becoming harder to fulfill. We are not many now, but we are still strong enough to protect what remains. The question is whether we do so with your cooperation or over your corpses. The vision ended. We were back in the conference room, but everyone was changed. Crenshaw was pale, trembling. The security contractor had tears streaming down his face. They'd been shown something, each according to their nature, and it had shaken them to their core. The development. Crenshaw's voice was barely a whisper. We'll cancel it. Find somewhere else. The being nodded slowly. Wise, but wisdom after threat is less valuable than wisdom before. Remember this moment. Share it with others who would break the boundaries. We are patient, but not infinitely so. It turned to me one last time. You have done well, Bridgewalker. Continue to speak for the forest. Help your kind remember what they have forgotten. The balance must be maintained. Then it was gone. No dramatic exit, no puff of smoke. Simply there one moment, absent the next. The meeting broke up quickly after that. Crenshaw and her team left without another word, moving like people waking from a dream. The security contractor paused at the door, looking back at me. "How long?" he asked. "How long have they been here?" "Always," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of centuries. The older hiker's eyes widened, and I could see the questions forming on his lips, but I raised a hand to silence him. This was not the time for explanations. The forest was still watching, and we were not yet safe. The creature, the great guardian as my grandfather had called it, remained at the edge of the clearing, its massive form barely visible in the shadows. Its glowing eyes tracked our every movement, but it made no move to approach. It was waiting, testing us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch worn smooth by years of handling. Inside was tobacco, sacred to my people, mixed with sage and cedar. My grandfather had given it to me on the day I became a ranger, telling me that it would protect me when the old spirits stirred. I had carried it with me ever since, never truly believing I would need it. Until now, I opened the pouch and took a pinch of the mixture, scattering it on the ground before us. The scent of tobacco and sage filled the air, sharp and earthy. I spoke the old words, the ones my grandfather had taught me, words in the Cherokee tongue that had been passed down through generations. Un Etlanvi, guardian of the sacred mountains, we walk in peace. We seek only safe passage through your domain. We honor the ancient ways and the old agreements. The creature shifted, its massive head tilting as if listening. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The younger woman clutched my arm, her voice trembling. "What is that thing? What's happening?" "Something older than any of us," I said quietly. "My people have stories about them. They were here before us, before anyone. They are the keepers of the deep places, the guardians of the sacred groves. Most people call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but those are just names we've given to something we don't understand." The injured man groaned, his face pale with pain and fear. "You're saying that's real? That's actually Bigfoot?" I nodded slowly. "Real as you and me. But it's not what the stories make it out to be. It's not a monster, it's a protector. And right now, it's deciding whether we belong here or not." The creature took a step forward, and the hikers tensed. I kept my hand raised, palm open, showing I meant no harm. The guardian's eyes never left mine as it moved closer, each footfall sending vibrations through the earth. When it was only 20 feet away, it stopped. In the moonlight filtering through the canopy, I could see it more clearly. Its face was almost human in its intelligence, with deep-set eyes that held an ancient wisdom. Its fur was dark brown, streaked with gray, and its massive hands ended in fingers that were surprisingly delicate despite their size. It stood at least 9 feet tall, its shoulders broad as a barn door. The guardian raised one massive hand and pointed deeper into the forest, away from the trail we had been following. Then it made a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within its chest. Not a growl this time, but something else, a communication. I understood. "We need to go that way," I said to the hikers. "It's showing us a safe path." The older man looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want us to follow that thing?" "It's not going to hurt us," I said with more confidence than I felt. "If it wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. It's offering a safe passage, but we need to show respect. We need to trust." The forest had its own laws, its own balance. My grandfather had taught me that when you entered the deep places, you were no longer in the world of men. You were in the realm of the old spirits, and you had to abide by their rules. I helped the injured man to his feet, supporting his weight as we began to move in the direction the guardian had indicated. The creature watched us for a moment longer, then turned and began walking ahead of us, its massive form moving through the trees with surprising grace. The hikers followed reluctantly, their fear palpable. But they had no choice. The forest had claimed us, and our only hope was to follow the ancient guardian into the heart of the wilderness. As we walked, I thought of my grandfather's words. The mountain remembers, Tsalagi. It remembers the first people, the first agreements. When you walk in the old places, you walk in the footsteps of your ancestors. Never forget that. I had not forgotten. And tonight the mountain was reminding me of promises made long ago, when the world was young and the boundaries between the seen and unseen were thin as morning mist. The guardian led us deeper into the forest, through paths I had never seen despite my years as a ranger. The trees here were older, their trunks massive and gnarled with age. Moss hung from the branches like ancient beards, and the air was thick with the scent of centuries. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, I knew, lay the answer to why the hikers had been taken, and what the forest wanted from us in return. The sacred grove. The guardian led us through the primordial forest for what felt like hours, though time seemed to flow differently in these ancient woods. The injured hiker leaned heavily on me, his breathing labored, while the others followed in stunned silence. The only sounds were our footsteps on the soft earth and the occasional crack of a branch in the darkness. The trees grew larger as we went deeper, their trunks so massive that it would take a dozen people holding hands to encircle them. These were the grandfathers of the forest, trees that had stood here since before the Cherokee walked these lands, before any human eyes had gazed upon their majesty. The very air felt different here, older, heavier, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The guardian moved ahead of us with fluid grace, its massive form navigating the undergrowth without disturbing so much as a leaf. Every so often, it would pause and look back, those glowing eyes checking to ensure we still followed. In those moments, I caught glimpses of something almost human in its expression. Patience, perhaps even concern. "Where is it taking us?" the young woman whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of our movement. "Somewhere sacred," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure myself. My grandfather had spoken of places in the mountains where the veil between worlds grew thin, where the spirits walked openly and the old magic still held sway. I had always thought them mere stories, tales to inspire reverence for the land. Now, following a creature of legend through the midnight forest, I wasn't so sure. The guardian suddenly stopped, raising one massive hand. We froze instantly, every muscle tense. It tilted its head, listening to something we couldn't hear, then let out a low, melodious call that echoed through the trees. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, part howl, part song, with undertones that seemed to resonate in my chest. An answering call came from somewhere in the distance, then another from a different direction. My blood ran cold as I realized we weren't alone. There were more of them out there in the darkness. The hikers pressed closer together, fear radiating from them in waves. The injured man's grip on my shoulder tightened painfully. "Stay calm," I said, though my own heart was racing. "They're not going to hurt us." "How can you know that?" the older man hissed. I didn't answer because I didn't know. I was operating on instinct now, on faith in the old stories and the wisdom of my ancestors. My hand found the medicine pouch again, and I drew strength from its familiar weight. The guardian resumed walking, and we had no choice but to follow. The forest opened up ahead, revealing a clearing unlike any I had seen before. In the center stood a grove of ancient cedars arranged in a perfect circle, their branches intertwining overhead to form a natural cathedral. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the canopy, casting everything in an ethereal silver glow. But it was what lay within the grove that took my breath away. Stones, massive and clearly worked by hands, stood in a circle within the trees. They were covered in symbols, some I recognized as Cherokee, others far older, their meanings lost to time. The stones hummed with energy, a vibration I felt in my bones, and there, sitting against one of the stones, were three figures, the missing hikers. They were alive but seemed to be in some kind of trance, their eyes open but unseeing, their bodies perfectly still. They looked unharmed, but there was something different about them, something I couldn't quite place. "John!" The young woman tried to rush forward, recognizing one of the figures, but I caught her arm. "Wait," I said. "Something's not right." The guardian moved into the grove, its massive form somehow fitting perfectly into the sacred space. It approached the entranced hikers and made a series of gestures with its hands, complex movements that seemed almost like sign language. As it did, the stones began to glow faintly, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within. I felt the pull then, a tugging at something deep inside me, something that recognized this place even though I had never been here before. The blood of my ancestors sang in my veins, and suddenly I understood. "This is a healing place," I said, the words coming unbidden to my lips. "A sanctuary. They brought them here to heal them." "Heal them from what?" the older man asked. I moved closer, studying the entranced hikers. Now I could see what had felt wrong. There were subtle signs. A darkness around their eyes, a grayish tinge to their skin, the way their chests barely moved with their breathing. The sickness, I whispered, remembering another of my grandfather's stories. The sleeping sickness that comes from disturbing the old places. The guardian turned to me then, and in its ancient eyes, I saw confirmation. These hikers had stumbled into something they shouldn't have, had disturbed something that should have been left alone, and the guardians in their wisdom had brought them here to heal. But healing came with a price. It always did in the old stories. The guardian approached me, its massive form towering over us. It reached out with one enormous hand, palm up, and waited. I knew what it wanted, what it needed. The choice. What's happening? The injured man asked, his voice tight with pain and fear. I looked at the entranced hikers, at my charges who trusted me to get them to safety, at the guardian waiting patiently for my decision. The old ways demanded balance. A life saved required a life pledged. Not death, but service, connection, the restoration of the ancient pact between human and spirit, between the seen and unseen worlds. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. One day, Tsalagi, the mountain will call on you to remember, to choose. When that day comes, you must listen with more than your ears. You must listen with your blood. I understood now. This wasn't just about rescuing lost hikers. This was about something much older, much deeper. The guardians weren't monsters, they were keepers of the ancient covenant, and that covenant was breaking. The modern world had forgotten the old agreements, had pushed too far into the sacred places without respect or understanding. I reached for my medicine pouch one more time, feeling the weight of generations in my hand. The choice was mine to make, but I already knew what my answer would be. The mountain had called, and I would answer. With trembling fingers, I emptied the contents of the pouch into my palm. Sacred tobacco, cedar, sage, and herbs whose Cherokee names my grandfather had whispered to me in the firelight. The mixture felt warm against my skin, pulsing with its own life. I stepped forward, leaving the terrified hikers behind me, and entered the circle of standing stones. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world changed. The air grew thick, almost liquid, and colors became more vivid even in the moonlight. I could hear the heartbeat of the earth itself, a deep rhythmic thrumming that matched my own pulse. The guardian watched me approach, its ancient eyes reflecting something that might have been approval. I raised my hands to the sky, then scattered the sacred mixture into the wind. It swirled around the grove in impossible patterns, defying the laws of physics, creating spirals of smoke and light. The words came to me in Cherokee, words I had never learned but somehow knew, rising from some ancestral memory buried deep in my bones. I am Tsalagi of the Sali clan, grandson of those who walked these lands since the beginning, who made the first agreements when the world was young and the boundaries were thin. My voice grew stronger with each word. I stand before you as my ancestors did, to honor the old ways and restore what has been broken. The guardian extended its massive hand, and I understood. I placed my hand in its palm, my fingers tiny against its enormous grasp. The moment our skin touched, visions flooded my mind. I saw the mountains as they were millennia ago, when the guardians walked openly among the first people. I saw the sacred covenant made between human and spirit, a promise of mutual protection and respect. I saw how the agreement had been broken, slowly at first, then faster as the modern world encroached on the ancient places. I saw the guardians retreating deeper into the wilderness, taking the old magic with them, leaving humanity diminished and disconnected. And I saw what was needed now. The healing requires a bridge, I said aloud, understanding flooding through me. Someone to stand between the worlds, to remember and teach the old ways, to restore the balance. The guardian's grip tightened slightly, and warmth spread from its touch up my arm and through my entire body. I gasped as something fundamental shifted inside me. I could feel the forest differently now. Every tree, every stone, every creature was part of a vast, interconnected web of life, and I was part of it too. Behind me, I heard the injured hiker gasp. I turned to see his wound closing, the flesh knitting together as if time was reversing. His face, which had been pale with pain, flushed with healthy color. The other hikers stared in amazement as their exhaustion vanished, replaced by a vitality they had never known. In the circle, the three entranced hikers began to stir. The darkness around their eyes faded, the grayish tinge to their skin warming to normal hues. They blinked, confused, as if waking from a long dream. But the transformation wasn't finished. The standing stones began to pulse with brighter light, and the symbols carved into them started to move, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The very air sang with power, and I felt myself changing further. Knowledge flooded into me, healing songs, the true names of plants, the hidden paths through the mountains, the language of the guardians. I understood now that I wasn't just a park ranger anymore. I was something more, something that hadn't existed for generations. A bridge keeper, a guardian of the threshold between worlds. The great guardian released my hand and stepped back. It made a series of complex gestures, and somehow I understood them perfectly. It was telling me about the others, the ones still hidden in the deep places waiting. It was showing me the sacred sites that needed protection, the places where the veil was thin. It was teaching me my new responsibilities. As it vanished into the shadows, other shapes moved in the darkness. More guardians, watching from afar. I raised my hand in acknowledgement, and they faded back into the deep woods, satisfied that the covenant had been renewed. The newly healed hikers stood on shaky legs, supported by their companions. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, seeing something different in me now. I was still the ranger who had come to rescue them, but I was also something else, something that belonged to older times and deeper truths. "We need to get you all back to civilization," I said, surprised by the new resonance in my voice. "But first you must understand something. What you've seen here tonight is sacred. The old agreements require silence from those who witness the deep mysteries. Can you honor that?" They nodded, one by one, understanding the weight of what they had experienced. The forest had shown them mercy, had healed them when it could have claimed them. That came with obligations. As I led them out of the sacred grove, I felt the weight of my new role settling on my shoulders. I was still a park ranger, but now I was also a guardian of guardians, a keeper of the ancient covenant. I would walk between worlds, protecting both human and spirit, maintaining the balance that kept both realms whole. Epilogue. Between two worlds. 6 months had passed since that night in the sacred grove. To the outside world, I was still just Salagi, a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains. I still wore the uniform, still guided hikers, still protected the land, but those who looked closely might notice the changes, the way shadows seemed to bend around me, the way birds would land on my shoulder without fear, the way the forest itself seemed to part before me. My grandfather had passed 2 months after my transformation, as if he had been waiting just long enough to see the covenant renewed. On his deathbed, he had smiled at me with knowing eyes. "The mountain has chosen." Something battered the door behind me, and my heart pounded like it might explode. Every nerve in my body screamed that I was seconds from disaster. But I couldn't abandon the park visitor cowering beside me, counting on my protection. "My name is Brian Mills, and this happened to me back in 2009 in Cimarron Canyon State Park, New Mexico. I had been stationed there for 5 years, running solo patrols in a uniform that had seen better days. Those 5 years had worn on me like the elements had worn on my badge, once shiny, now dulled by sun and wind and the particular kind of isolation that comes from being the only authority figure for miles. The canyon walls rose around the park like ancient sentinels, their red-orange facades hiding secrets in the shadows of their crevices. Locals had always whispered about strange occurrences in the deeper parts of the gorge. I'd dismissed them as campfire stories meant to frighten tourists and children. That morning had started like any other. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, leaves beginning to turn, painting the landscape in burnt orange and deep crimson. The visitor center's old coffee maker sputtered and wheezed as I poured myself a cup of something resembling coffee. I remember checking my watch, 6:17 a.m., and feeling that particular emptiness that comes from waking up alone in a park ranger cabin for the 1825th consecutive day. I made my usual rounds at the main trailhead, where the scent of pine sap hung thick in the morning air. The trail registry showed only a few entries from the previous day. A couple approached from their campsite, looking refreshed despite the early hour. They joked about my oversized ranger hat, and I flashed them a grin, telling them I'd keep the park's raccoons from stealing their breakfast. It was my way of breaking the ice, a bit of humor for hikers who didn't expect to see many people out there. "Those raccoons been giving you trouble lately, Ranger Mills?" the man asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Nothing I can't handle," I replied, adjusting my hat. Though between you and me, I think they've been plotting something big. Found my lunchbox rifled through yesterday. Their laughter echoed briefly against the canyon walls before being swallowed by the vast wilderness. As they continued down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that their voices sounded somehow wrong against the backdrop of the trees, too human, too temporary. The morning passed with the usual routine. I cleared a fallen branch from the Eagle's Nest Trail, replaced a faded warning sign near the cliff edge, and logged the water levels at 3 different points along the river. The radio at my hip remained quiet save for the occasional static burst, until noon. By noon I started getting radio chatter about something strange in the gorge. A fisherman named Dale, who rarely bothered me unless something truly rattled him, reported hearing shrieks echoing against the canyon walls. Dale was a fixture at Cimarron, an old-timer who'd been fishing these waters since before I was born. His leathery face had more stories etched into it than the visitor center's logbooks. "Brian," his voice crackled through the static. "Something ain't right down in the South Gorge." I keyed the mic. "What have you got, Dale?" Heard screaming. Not human, not animal neither. Something wrong. His voice held none of the easy confidence I was used to. Instead, there was a tremor that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I asked if it was an animal in distress, but Dale insisted he'd never heard anything like it. "Been fishing these waters 37 years, he said. "Heard mountain lions, bears, even a wolf pack once. This ain't like any of that. It's like something dying that shouldn't be able to die." I teased him a little, saying he probably just needed a nap, and he laughed it off, but the sound was hollow, forced. The tension in his voice left my stomach uneasy. "Maybe so," he conceded. "But you check it out anyway, would ya? I'm packing up. Don't feel right being out here alone today." That admission from Dale, who I'd seen weather flash floods and surprise snowstorms without complaint, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I set off to investigate, the weight of my pack suddenly noticeable against my shoulders. The path to the South Gorge wound through stands of aspen and pine, their trunks creating a natural labyrinth. As I wound through the narrow switchbacks, the dust kicked up under my boots and the midday sun beat down. The trail was silent, not a single bird call, not a rustling branch. The silence was what got to me first. Forests are never truly quiet. There's always the rustle of small creatures, the call of birds, the whisper of wind through leaves. But as I descended deeper into the gorge, all those background noises faded away until all I could hear was my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the trail. It was as if the wildlife knew something I didn't, as if they'd all fled or hidden away. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, with each step downward. Not from exertion, I knew these trails like the lines on my palm, but from something else, something intangible. A pressure, like the atmospheric change before a violent storm, except the sky remained clear and blue above the canyon walls. Halfway down, I noticed tracks in the soft dirt, deep impressions of something with an odd spacing between its toes. Each print sank in as though it carried enormous weight. The tracks were unlike anything in my ranger training manuals, not bear, not mountain lion, not human. 5 digits, but with the middle one set back, almost like a thumb but in the wrong place. Each toe ended in what looked like a deep gouge in the earth, as if tipped with claws or talons that dragged through the soil. I squatted, took a closer look, and wondered if it belonged to a lost bear with a deformed paw. But even as I formed the thought, I knew I was lying to myself. No bear made tracks like these. No known animal did. The impressions were fresh, the edges still crumbling. No dew or debris settled within. Whatever made them had passed through recently. Then I remembered Dale's shrieks and my gut started doing somersaults. I followed those marks, my hand resting on my sidearm more for comfort than protection. The tracks led deeper into the gorge, toward an area where the canyon walls narrowed to create a perpetual twilight even at high noon. They vanished in rocky terrain near a small cave entrance. The opening was jagged and dark, about as inviting as the inside of an abandoned mine shaft. Standing before that black maw, I felt a primal revulsion crawl up my spine. The cave entrance wasn't just dark, it seemed to swallow the light around it, creating a void in the landscape. A cold draft seeped from its depths, carrying a scent I couldn't identify. Something mineral and organic at once, like wet stone and rotting meat. I radioed back that I was continuing my search. No one responded, which annoyed me, but I reasoned that signals were often patchy in the deeper parts of the gorge, where the towering walls created natural barriers to transmission. I double-checked the 9mm on my belt. It was standard issue for rangers at this park because we occasionally dealt with mountain lions. But that day, I felt I might need more than a sidearm. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped toward the cave entrance. The beam seemed to weaken as it penetrated the darkness, as if the light itself was being drained away. I took one step inside, then another. The temperature dropped noticeably. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each drop echoing with unnatural clarity. I didn't hear anything inside the cave except my own breathing, which seemed thunderously loud in the enclosed space. As I ventured a few yards in, my light caught something on the cave wall, markings, about shoulder height. Not graffiti from hikers or the ancient pictographs sometimes found in the area. These were fresh gouges in the stone. 5 parallel lines that looked like they'd been carved by something with immense strength and sharp claws. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rough edges. The stone was hard granite. Whatever had made these marks had to be incredibly powerful. A sound from deeper in the cave froze me in place. A soft, wet sliding noise, like something heavy dragging itself across damp stone. I held my breath, straining to hear. The sound didn't repeat, but in that moment of silence, I became acutely aware that I was not alone in the darkness. I backed out slowly, keeping my eyes and flashlight trained on the depths of the cave. Once outside, the sunlight felt thin and inadequate against the chill that had settled in my bones. I turned back toward the main trail, walking faster than necessary, my footsteps loud in the unnatural quiet of the forest. A hiker named Allison almost ran me over as I emerged onto the main trail. She was moving at a sprint, her hiking pack bouncing wildly against her back. She collided with me hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs, her momentum carrying us both backward several steps before I caught my balance. She looked pale, as if she'd glimpsed something that didn't belong in broad daylight. Her face was drained of color, her eyes wide and darting, pupils dilated despite the bright afternoon sun. A sheen of sweat covered her forehead, plastering strands of hair to her skin. "Oh God, oh God," she kept repeating, her hands clutching at my uniform. "There's something out there, something in the trees." I tried to calm her with the same easy smile I'd used all morning, but she was shaking, trembling like an aspen leaf in a high wind. "Slow down," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Tell me what you saw." "I didn't see it clearly," she babbled, words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "Just a shape, a movement. Too big for a person. Too fast. It was watching me from my campsite. I felt it staring before I saw it move." "What did it look like?" I asked, my mind flashing to the strange tracks, the claw marks in the cave. "Wrong," she whispered, her fingers digging into my arm. "It looked wrong, like someone tried to make a human but didn't know how all the parts fit together." My mouth went dry. "Where exactly was this?" "Pine Hollow campsite," she said. "Site 7. I was making lunch and watched. When I looked up, there was this shape behind the trees. Tall, so tall, and thin. When it moved," she shuddered violently. "When it moved, it didn't move right, like its joints bent the wrong way." The description sent ice through my veins. I led her to the visitor center, my hand on her elbow, supporting her as she stumbled alongside me. The center was empty when we arrived, the part-time staff having left at noon as usual, leaving me as the only park employee on duty. "Wait in the break room," I told her, guiding her to a chair. "There's water in the fridge. Try to calm down. I'm going to call for backup." She nodded mutely, her eyes still wide and frightened. I closed the break room door and moved to the communications desk. I tried calling for backup again, pressing the transmit button harder than necessary, as if physical force could push my voice through whatever was blocking the signal. The radio crackled, but I got no voices, just static that rose and fell like some electronic tide. I tried all channels, even the emergency band reserved for serious situations, Nothing but the hiss and pop of dead air. I slammed the receiver down, frustration momentarily overwhelming my growing unease. The visitor center's landline was my next option, but when I lifted the handset, the line was dead. No dial tone, no static, just a hollow silence that seemed to mock my attempts at communication. Just then, a wiry man in a neon vest burst through the center's door shouting for help. The vest was the bright orange-yellow of park maintenance staff, but it was torn at the shoulder and stained with something dark. His face was contorted with pain and fear, his breathing ragged. "Jesus Christ, thank God," he gasped when he saw me. Something attacked me out by the generator. He had a massive scratch across his forearm and claimed it came from something in the pines north of the cabin area. 3 parallel gashes ran from his wrist almost to his elbow, deep enough that I could see the pale gleam of exposed bone in the deepest part. The wounds were red and raw, seeping in a way that made me cringe. Not just blood, but a clear yellowish fluid that suggested the cuts went deep enough to hit lymph vessels. I guided him to a chair, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the churning in my stomach. "Let me see that," I said, gently taking his arm. The skin around the wounds was already inflamed, the edges puckered and discolored with a faint greenish tinge that suggested infection. Impossible for injuries so fresh but undeniably present. "I was doing a maintenance check on the generator," he said, wincing as I examined the wound. "Routine stuff, you know." Then I heard this screech. Never heard anything like it. Turned around, and there was this thing standing there at the edge of the clearing. "What did it look like?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew the answer. "Tall," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "So damn tall. Had to be 7, maybe 8 feet. But skinny, like it was starving. And its skin," he swallowed hard. "Its skin was all wrong. Pale, but not like a person. Like something that lives underground. And stretched tight, like there wasn't enough of it to cover whatever was underneath." "Did you see its face?" I asked, reaching for the first aid kit we kept behind the counter. The maintenance man shook his head, then stopped, reconsidering. "Just for a second. It had these eyes. They caught the light weird, reflected it like an animal's eyes do at night, but it was broad daylight, and they were gold. Yellow gold, like old coins. It moved on 2 legs but looked wrong," he continued, "as if its limbs were hinged at awkward angles." He'd only caught a glimpse, and in that glance it had swung an arm at him, an arm too long for its body, ending in hands with fingers that looked more like talons. "It was fast," he said, his voice hollow with remembered terror. "1 second it was at the edge of the clearing, the next it was right in front of me. I didn't even see it move, just felt the air shift, and then pain. I tried to bandage him, but my hands shook a bit, the white gauze slipping through my fingers as I attempted to wrap it around his forearm. The wounds continued to seep, the bandages soaking through almost as soon as I applied them. "Wait here with Allison," I told him, nodding toward the break room. "I need to grab the trauma kit from the storage closet. It has better supplies for wounds like these." I moved to the closet, pulled out the larger first aid kit, and returned to find the maintenance man had joined Allison in the break room. They sat in silence, both pale and shaking, united in their fear. I cleaned and rebandaged his arm with the better supplies from the trauma kit, but the wound still wouldn't stop seeping. He needed proper medical attention, but we were at least an hour's drive from the nearest hospital. I told him to wait with Allison while I grabbed more supplies and locked the center's doors. Every instinct told me to wait for reinforcement, but I was the only ranger around. The others were out on controlled burn duty miles away. I couldn't reach them by radio, and I couldn't leave these 2 alone while I drove for help. "I'm going to check out the generator shack," I told them, checking my sidearm again. "See if I can figure out what attacked you. You 2 stay here, lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but me." "You can't go out there alone," Allison protested, her voice tight with fear. "It's my job," I replied, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "Besides, I'm armed. I'll be careful." The maintenance man looked up at me, his face gray with pain and blood loss. "Be careful," he echoed, but his tone suggested he thought I was making a fatal mistake. I nodded, squared my shoulders, and stepped outside, hearing the click of the lock behind me. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting longer shadows across the visitor center clearing. The forest surrounding the clearing seemed darker than it should have been, the shadows between the trees deeper, more impenetrable. So I left the visitor center and headed toward the generator shack to see if I could make sense of his story. The path took me through a thick stand of aspens, their white trunks creating a natural colonnade on either side of the trail. In the fading light, they looked like pale sentinels, watching my passage with indifferent eyes. I moved slowly, scanning the ground for fresh prints, my sidearm drawn and ready at my side. The forest had grown unnaturally still again, the normal sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. Even the wind seemed to have died, leaving the leaves motionless on their branches. Halfway through the aspen grove, I noticed fallen branches arranged in a strange pattern, like someone had twisted them into a circular shape about 6 feet in diameter. The branches were woven together with unnatural precision, their ends splintered as if broken by tremendous force rather than fallen naturally. In the center of the circle lay a small pile of stones, arranged in a pattern that niggled at the edge of my memory. Familiar yet foreign, like a word on the tip of my tongue. My nerves prickled. The arranged branches felt deliberate, intelligent, not the random debris of the forest floor, but a constructed thing. A marker, or a warning. I could feel the hush around me, as though the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I skirted around the branch circle, unwilling to step within its boundaries. As I passed, I noticed something I'd missed at first glance. Dark stains on some of the branches, already dried to a rusty brown. Blood. Something had bled on these branches, and recently, the aspen grove gave way to a small clearing where the generator shed stood. A simple structure of weathered wood with a corrugated metal roof. It provided power to the visitor center and ranger station when the main lines went down, which happened frequently during the area's violent summer thunderstorms. Suddenly I heard a man screaming in the distance, closer to the generator shack. The sound cut through the silence like a knife, high and desperate, abruptly cut short in a way that made my stomach clench. I broke into a run, caution momentarily forgotten in the face of that terrible cry. By the time I got there, I found the door hanging off one hinge, and the maintenance man's neon vest near the threshold. A second vest, I realized with a jolt of horror, not the one the injured man had been wearing. There was another maintenance worker out here, or had been. My heart hammered as I nudged the door open with my gun raised. The small space was in chaos. Inside, the shelves were toppled and the floor was slick with something dark. Blood. So much blood that it seemed impossible it had come from just one person. It pooled on the concrete floor, black in the dim light, reflecting the single bulb that still miraculously burned overhead. Tools were scattered everywhere, some broken, others bent as if used as desperate weapons by someone fighting for their life. The generator itself was still running, its steady hum providing a surreal soundtrack to the scene of destruction. My chest tightened at the sight. I called out, hoping against hope that whoever had screamed was still alive, still capable of answering. "Park Ranger, is anyone here? Do you need help?" No answer came back to me, just the mocking echo of my own voice against the metal walls. Then I spotted movement by the back window. It wasn't much, just a shifting of shadows, a suggestion of motion in the corner of my eye. I swung my flashlight toward it, the beam cutting through the gloom. It looked like a silhouette, tall and thin. It had no visible hair, just bare skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame, arms so long they reached near its knees, and eyes that caught the light, reflecting a hint of gold, lambent and terrible in the darkness. I froze. My finger hovered on the trigger of my sidearm, but some primal instinct kept me from firing. For a moment it stared at me, unmoving save for a slight swaying, like a branch in an unfelt wind. Its mouth parted slightly, showing small jagged teeth that made me think of broken glass, countless needle-sharp points that glinted wetly in the beam of my flashlight. For an endless moment we regarded each other across the blood-slick floor of the generator shack. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, transfixed by those reflective eyes that showed no emotion, no recognition, nothing but an ancient and alien hunger. In a heartbeat, it vaulted through the window, leaving shattered fragments everywhere. The movement was impossibly fast, a blur of pale limbs and flashing eyes. I tried to follow, but by the time I got outside, it was gone. The undergrowth was dense, making it impossible to keep it in sight. I scanned the tree line, my flashlight beam cutting through the gathering dusk, catching nothing but the normal shadows of the forest. I heard a crash in the distance, then silence, the sound of something large moving rapidly through the brush, then deliberately going still. That was enough for me to realize we had something dangerous on the loose, something that hunted with intelligence and purpose. My thoughts turned to Allison and the injured maintenance man, alone and vulnerable in the visitor center. I needed to get back to them, to get all of us to somewhere more secure. I moved quickly back through the aspen grove, my skin crawling with the sensation of being watched. The branch circle seemed more ominous now, its carefully arranged pattern a deliberate marker in the wilderness. I gave it a wider berth this time, unwilling to let its boundary touch even the edge of my shadow. The sun had slipped lower toward the canyon rim, casting the entire forest in the ruddy glow of approaching sunset. Long shadows stretched across the path, turning familiar landmarks into crouching, threatening shapes. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every creak of a branch overhead made me start, my hand tightening on my weapon. I reached the visitor center clearing and saw with relief that the building appeared undisturbed. The windows reflected the bloody light of sunset, giving the impression that the interior was filled with fire. I approached cautiously nonetheless, scanning the surrounding forest edge before making the final dash across the open ground to the center's door. "It's Brian," I called, knocking on the locked door. "Let me in." I heard the scrape of a chair being moved, then the click of the lock. Allison's face appeared in the narrow opening, still pale but composed now, her earlier panic replaced by a grim determination. "Did you find anything?" she asked, as she let me in. I hesitated, unwilling to increase her fear but knowing they needed to understand the danger we were in. "Yes," I said finally. "I think there's another maintenance worker out there. And I saw something, the same thing that attacked him." I nodded toward the injured man who was slumped in a chair, his bandaged arm cradled against his chest. "We need to move," I continued. "This building isn't secure enough. The ranger station has better doors, fewer windows. We'll be safer there." Allison nodded, already gathering her backpack. The injured man struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. His face was alarmingly gray, the skin around his eyes darkened as if bruised. The bandages on his arm were soaked through again, but the bleeding seemed to have slowed. "Can you walk?" I asked him. He nodded. "Don't have much choice, do I?" I checked outside again before leading them out the door. The clearing was empty, the surrounding forest silent in the deepening twilight. We moved as a tight group, Allison helping support the injured man, me scanning constantly for any sign of movement. We rushed back to the visitor center. Allison was huddled with the injured man who was still bleeding through his bandages. She whispered that she'd heard something scraping at the outside walls while I was gone, a rhythmic sound like claws or nails dragging across the wooden siding. "It knows we're here," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was testing the walls, looking for a way in." I told them to come with me to the station office, a more secure structure with barred windows. Built in the 1950s when the park was first established, the ranger station was a solid structure of stone and heavy timber, originally designed to withstand the area's harsh winters and serve as an emergency shelter during forest fires. We carefully stepped outside, but the entire clearing felt hostile, like we were intruders in our own park. The fading daylight cast long shadows from the trees, each one a potential hiding place for the creature. The air itself seemed to press against us, thick with unspoken menace. We managed to get to the office without incident, though I could have sworn I saw movement at the forest edge just as we reached the door, a pale shape, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. As soon as I unlocked the door, the same thumping sound that had woken me that morning repeated. A heavy, deliberate pounding that echoed across the clearing. That was the noise that battered my sense of safety, like fists or claws slamming against a surface. This time it came from the tree line and it was deliberate, a steady pounding that seemed to carry a message. "I know you're there. I'm coming for you." I ushered Allison and the man inside and locked the heavy door behind us. The ranger station was a single large room with a small kitchenette, a communications desk, and several cots for overnight staff. The windows were narrow and covered with iron bars, a security measure implemented after a break-in several years ago. I locked every door, switched on the emergency radio, and tried calling for help again. The radio spat static at me, the white noise rising and falling in a pattern that almost sounded like words. Almost, but not quite, as if something was trying to communicate but didn't quite understand how human language worked. Static, I said aloud, though my mind whispered. Not static, something else. My throat went dry. I told them, sit tight, I've got to keep watch. It was late afternoon now, and the light would fade soon. The canyon would be plunged into darkness well before true night fell as the sun dropped below the high western rim. I pulled every flashlight I could find out of storage, testing each one and placing them strategically around the room. What is that thing? Allison asked, her voice steadier now that we were behind solid walls. I've hiked all over this country, seen all kinds of wildlife. That wasn't any animal I've ever heard of. I shook my head. I don't know. It's not in any ranger manual, that's for sure. It's not natural, the injured man said suddenly. We both turned to look at him. He was sitting on one of the cots, his injured arm outstretched. The bandages had soaked through again, but now the stain was black rather than red, as if the blood had somehow darkened inside his veins. What do you mean? I asked. The way it moved, he said, his voice distant, as if he was speaking from the bottom of a well. Nothing natural moves like that. Nothing that evolved on this planet. A chill ran down my spine at his words. You think it's what, an alien? He shook his head weakly. I don't know what it is, but I know it doesn't belong here. And I know it's hunting us. While checking the office windows, I spotted something pale gliding between the trunks about 50 yards from the station. It was the same shape I'd seen at the generator shack, moving with that same unnatural grace, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it navigated between the trees. My blood went cold. I refused to panic, forced my breathing to remain steady even as my heart hammered against my ribs. It's out there, I said quietly, gesturing for Allison to look. She moved to the window, careful to stay back from the glass. Her sharp intake of breath told me she'd spotted it too. What's it doing? Watching, I replied. Waiting. The creature circled the clearing, keeping to the edge of the forest, its movements purposeful and predatory. It never fully emerged from the tree line, but I caught glimpses of it as it moved. That too tall, too thin silhouette, those arms that hung almost to the ground, those reflective eyes that caught the last light of day. Rangers are trained to face wild hazards, yet I'd never dealt with anything like this. My training covered bear attacks, lost hikers, forest fires, even the occasional criminal activity that found its way into the park's remote corners. Nothing had prepared me for a creature that defied classification, that moved like no known animal, that hunted with a terrible intelligence. As the last light faded from the sky, the creature grew bolder. It emerged from the tree line, crossing the open ground with a strange, loping gait that covered distance with alarming speed. It circled the ranger station once, twice, 3 times, each circuit bringing it closer to the walls. On its 4th pass, it approached one of the barred windows, rising to its full height to peer inside. It was even taller than I'd thought, its head level with the top of the window frame, a good 8 feet off the ground. Its face pressed against the glass, those golden eyes scanning the interior until they locked onto mine. I stumbled back from the window, my legs suddenly weak. The face that had stared at me through the glass was barely a face at all, just a suggestion of features stretched across a skull-like structure, the skin so tight that every bone and sinew was visible beneath. Its mouth was a lipless slash, those needle teeth visible even through the dirty glass. We can't stay here, I said, my voice hoarse. It's testing the defenses, looking for a way in, and I think it's going to find one. Allison pleaded. We have to get out of here. The injured man agreed, and I wanted that too, but we had no safe path without a working vehicle. My patrol truck was parked beside the center. If we made a run for it, we'd have to cross open ground, fully exposed to whatever that thing was. But staying put meant a slow siege. with a creature that seemed to grow more determined by the hour. "How's your arm?" I asked the maintenance man. He pulled back the bandage to check, and I had to stifle a gasp. The wounds had turned black at the edges, the surrounding skin mottled with dark veins that spread outward like the roots of a poisonous plant. The flesh had an unnatural sheen to it, almost reflective in the harsh fluorescent light of the ranger station. "Doesn't hurt anymore," he said, his voice flat. "Can't really feel it at all." That worried me more than if he'd been screaming in pain. The lack of sensation suggested nerve damage, or worse, some kind of toxin from the creature's claws that was spreading through his system. I took a long breath, forcing myself to think clearly despite the panic clawing at the edges of my mind. "Gather your things," I said at last. "We'll do it fast. My truck is maybe 30 yards from the door. We run together, stay close. I'll drive us out to the highway, find help." They nodded, collecting what little they had. I distributed the flashlights, keeping the most powerful one for myself. We checked the windows one last time. The creature had moved away from the building, back to the edge of the clearing. It seemed to be watching the front door, waiting. "We'll go out the back," I whispered, though I doubted it could hear us through the thick walls. "Circle around to the truck. On my signal, we move. No hesitation, no looking back, just run." We counted to 3 and sprinted for the truck. The office door banged shut behind us with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire canyon. The man stumbled almost immediately, his weakened condition making it hard for him to keep pace. Allison helped him, supporting his weight as they ran. My eyes darted to the far end of the lot where I saw that shape lurch forward, limbs snapping through the underbrush with a sound like breaking branches. It moved with that unnerving speed, covering ground faster than anything had a right to. I got the truck door open, my hands fumbling with the keys as Allison and the maintenance man reached the vehicle. "Get in," I shouted, all pretense of quiet abandoned now. They piled in, the injured man collapsing across the back seat, Allison scrambling into the passenger side. I started the engine, jammed it into gear and floored it. Dust roiled up behind us as the tires spun, seeking purchase on the gravel lot. We tore down the main access road, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the now complete darkness. Half a mile in, I saw movement in my rearview mirror. Something leaped across the road behind us with an unnatural grace, a pale blur in the red glow of the taillights. It was following us, moving parallel to the road through the dense forest on either side. My pulse hammered in my ears. "It's still coming," I said, pressing the accelerator harder. The truck's engine whined in protest as I pushed it beyond what the rough road could safely handle. "How can it keep up with a vehicle?" Allison asked, her voice tight with fear. I had no answer for her. The laws of biology as I understood them said nothing should be able to match pace with a truck moving at 40 miles per hour through rough terrain. Yet there it was, flashing between the trees, occasionally visible in the side mirrors as it kept pace with our desperate flight. We kept going, hoping it wouldn't follow, hoping the road would lead us back to some form of civilization. The main park road would eventually connect with the highway, but it was 15 miles of winding, poorly maintained track before we'd reach that junction. As we rounded a bend near a small clearing, the truck lurched hard on a hidden rock. There was a loud bang from the front passenger side, followed by the unmistakable flapping sound of a blown tire. I lost control and veered off the road, the steering wheel jerking violently in my hands. We crashed into a scrub oak, the hood crumpling, steam hissing from the radiator. The impact threw us forward, the seatbelts cutting into our chests. Allison shrieked and the man groaned in pain, a low, animal sound that barely seemed human. I scrambled to check them. They were bruised but conscious, though the maintenance man looked worse than ever, his skin waxy and gray in the dim light of the truck's interior. Allison had a cut on her forehead that bled freely, but head wounds always bleed dramatically, and she seemed otherwise unharmed. Through the cracked windshield, I saw movement in the distance. The shape again appeared, weaving between tall grasses, drawn by the noise of our crash. It moved with purpose now, no longer paralleling our course but coming straight for the disabled vehicle. "We have to move," I said, already reaching for the door handle. "Now." Before it gets here, we got out quickly, supporting the injured man between us. His legs barely seemed to work, and his head lolled on his neck as if the muscles could no longer support its weight. The creature was maybe 100 yards away now, closing fast. I drew my sidearm and fired a warning shot in the air. The crack of the 9mm echoed across the canyon, unnaturally loud in the quiet night. Whatever it was, it paused at the sound. I don't think it understood what a gun was, but it recognized a threat. It crouched low, almost on all fours, its long arms splayed out to the sides like a spider's legs. It made no sound, but I could feel its attention on us, calculating, assessing. I gestured for my companions to hurry. "This way," I whispered, pointing to a slope that rose from the side of the road. Atop the rise stood an old fire tower, one of several placed throughout the park to spot wildfires during the dry season. We stumbled up the slope, half carrying the maintenance man between us. The ground was treacherous in the dark, loose scree sliding under our feet, hidden roots threatening to trip us with every step. My legs burned with the effort, every muscle screaming for rest. Behind us I heard that pounding on the ground, a rhythmic thudding like heavy footfalls, but too rapid, too numerous, as though it was testing how close it could get before we noticed its approach. We reached the base of the fire tower, a skeletal structure of weathered wood and rusted metal that rose 50 feet above the forest floor. A narrow staircase wound around the central shaft, leading to a small observation platform at the top. "Up?" I gasped, pushing Allison toward the stairs. "All the way up." She didn't argue, grabbing the railing and pulling herself upward. The maintenance man followed, moving with surprising strength given his earlier weakness. I took the rear, keeping my gun trained on the darkness below. We stumbled up the wooden steps of the tower, the ancient timbers creaking ominously beneath our weight. The staircase swayed with our movements, the entire structure shifting slightly in the night breeze. We reached the observation platform, a small enclosed space no more than 8 feet square, with windows on all sides to allow fire spotters a 360-degree view. We tossed open the hatch that led to the platform and barricaded ourselves inside. The hatch was heavy wood, reinforced with metal strapping, designed to protect against the elements rather than intruders, but solid nonetheless. No sooner had we secured the hatch than we heard scratching at the base of the tower. A series of impacts followed, as if something was hurling itself against the structure's legs. The timbers quaked as it struck them, each hit sending tremors through the floor. Allison crouched near the corner, covering her ears against the terrible sounds coming from below. The man clutched his side, breathing in ragged gasps that seemed to rattle in his chest. I moved to the windows, trying to spot the creature in the darkness below. The moon had risen, casting a pale silver light over the landscape. In that ghostly illumination, I caught glimpses of movement around the base of the tower, a pale shape circling, testing, occasionally rearing up to slam against the support beams. I had one clip left in my sidearm, and a single flare I'd grabbed from the truck before abandoning it. The flare was standard emergency equipment, meant to signal for help if stranded in the park's remote areas. I crept out to the small balcony that surrounded the observation platform, crouching low to avoid presenting a target. The creature was directly below me now, its pale form distinct against the dark earth. It was moving oddly, almost ritualistically, circling the tower's base and occasionally stopping to claw at the wooden supports. I aimed the flare downward and fired it at the base. The flare ignited with a hiss, bathing the area in harsh crimson light. In that bloody illumination, I saw the creature clearly for the first time. It was worse than my glimpses had suggested. Its body was humanoid but wrong in every particular, limbs too long and jointed in extra places, torso elongated and ribbed like an insect's carapace, neck sinuous and flexible beyond anything human. Its skin was not just pale but translucent in places, revealing shadowy structures beneath that bore no resemblance to human anatomy. The face turned upward as the flare illuminated it, those golden eyes reflecting the red light like twin flames. Its mouth opened in what might have been surprise or pain, revealing row upon row of those needle teeth, too many to fit in a normal jaw. And I heard a strangled shriek, a sound that seemed to come from multiple throats at once, layered and harmonic in a way no single organism should be capable of producing. The slamming halted as the creature recoiled from the harsh light and heat of the flare. It retreated to the edge of the illuminated circle, watching the burning flare with what looked like wary fascination. The flare would burn for 10 minutes at most, I knew, and then we would be in darkness again. I stayed still, gun at the ready for what felt like an hour, watching the creature watch the flare. It made no move to approach while the light burned, but neither did it retreat. It simply waited, showing a patience that chilled me more than its earlier aggression. Night closed in again as the flare sputtered and died, the forest returning to darkness broken only by moonlight. I strained my eyes, trying to locate the creature in the renewed gloom, but it had vanished from the circle of scorched earth where the flare had burned. For a moment I thought perhaps it had given up, driven away by the unfamiliar light and heat. Then I heard a soft scrabbling on the tower itself. Not at the base this time, but on the structure, the sound of claws on wood moving upward. It was climbing the tower. "It's coming up," I hissed, scrambling back into the observation platform and securing the balcony door. "Barricade everything, now." Allison moved with desperate energy, dragging the small desk from the corner to block the balcony door. The maintenance man remained where he was, slumped against the wall, his eyes fixed on the hatch in the floor through which we'd entered. I joined Allison, adding the room's only chair to the barricade. The scratching sound had grown louder, closer. It was moving up the exterior of the tower with terrifying speed, its claws finding purchase in the weathered wood. "The windows," I said, moving to check that each one was secured. They were simple panes designed to be opened in good weather to allow airflow. I made sure each was latched, though I had little faith the ancient mechanisms would hold against determined assault. The scratching stopped. For a moment silence reigned, broken only by our ragged breathing. Then came a new sound, a soft tapping on one of the windows, like someone politely requesting entry. I turned toward the sound, gun raised. There, framed in the moonlight-struck glass, was the creature's face, pressed against the pane just as it had been at the ranger station. But now there was nowhere to retreat to, nowhere to run. Those golden eyes fixed on me, unblinking and alien. The mouth moved, forming shapes that resembled speech but produced no sound I could hear. Was it trying to communicate, or simply mimicking human behavior it had observed? "What do you want?" I found myself asking, though I knew it couldn't understand me. In response, it placed one long-fingered hand against the glass. The fingers were wrong. Too many joints, too little differentiation between them, as if they were segments of a single appendage rather than separate digits. The tips ended in curved claws that looked wickedly sharp. It pressed harder, and the glass creaked ominously. Another hand joined the first, and then the window shattered inward in a spray of glass shards. I fired instinctively, the gun's report deafening in the confined space. The creature jerked back, a high keening sound escaping its throat. For a moment I thought I'd driven it off, but then it returned to the window, apparently unharmed. Where I'd hit it, center mass, a shot that would have dropped any human or animal. There was no blood, just a small puncture in that pale skin that seemed to close even as I watched. It began to pull itself through the broken window, those impossibly long limbs folding and unfolding as it navigated the narrow opening. I fired again and again, emptying my clip into its advancing form. Each impact made it flinch or pause momentarily, but none seemed to cause lasting damage. The gun clicked empty. I dropped it and reached for anything that might serve as a weapon. My hand closed around the heavy flashlight I'd brought from the ranger station. The creature was halfway inside now, its upper body through the window, those long arms reaching toward us. Allison had retreated to the far corner, pressing herself against the wall as if hoping to pass through it. The maintenance man hadn't moved, still slumped against the wall, watching with an expression of strange calm. I swung the flashlight with all my strength, connecting with the creature's head. There was a crack, but whether from the flashlight or the creature's skull, I couldn't tell. It recoiled slightly, that keening sound rising in pitch until it was almost beyond the range of human hearing. Then it surged forward again. Faster than before, one elongated hand closing around my wrist with crushing force. The flashlight fell from my numbed fingers as the creature pulled me toward it. Its face was inches from mine now, those golden eyes filling my vision. This close, I could see that they weren't solid gold but faceted. Compound like an insect's eyes but with a reptilian slit pupil bisecting each one. Its breath washed over me, carrying a scent like ozone and copper and something else, something ancient and wrong. I felt a curious calm settle over me, a resignation in the face of the inevitable. This was how it ended, then, not with retirement after decades of service, not with a peaceful death in old age, but here, in a forgotten fire tower, at the hands of something science couldn't explain. Then from behind me came a sound I'd been straining to hear for hours. The distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. Someone had heard my earlier radio calls, or perhaps the park office had become concerned when I missed my scheduled check-in. The creature heard it too, its head tilted, those golden eyes shifting away from my face to look upward through the tower's roof. Its grip on my wrist loosened fractionally, and I seized the opportunity, twisting free and stumbling backward. A powerful light cut through the darkness outside, the helicopter's searchlight sweeping across the forest and finding the tower. The beam poured through the broken window, flooding the observation platform with harsh white light. The creature shrieked, a sound of genuine pain this time. It recoiled from the light, those long limbs folding around its body. I was 30 kilometers inside the dense rainforests of the Washington Cascades when things went south. Not the kind of, oh no, we're lost, or I've misplaced my gear kind of south. No. This was the kind of disaster that makes you rethink every decision you've ever made. Like joining the military, taking that particular assignment, or hell, even being born in the first place. It was 1999. I was on a covert mission. I'm Arthur Vallon, and for the past 10 years I've been doing special ops for the U.S. Army's Green Berets. I've seen a lot of the worst this world has to offer. War-torn villages, bombed-out cities, and enough firepower to wipe out small countries. But nothing prepares you for the unexpected, especially when the enemy isn't human. We'd been sent to investigate strange reports near Mount Rainier. A few missing hikers, a couple of hunters that never came home, and some suspicious activity caught by surveillance drones. The brass wanted answers but didn't want to make a big deal about it, so they sent me and two other guys, Gibson and Miller, into the woods with nothing more than the usual gear, keeping it small and low-key. The Pacific Northwest is a whole different beast from any place I'd operated before. The trees stand like ancient sentinels, so thick you can barely see the sky. A perpetual wetness clings to everything, your clothes, your skin, your very bones. Moss-covered trunks loom in every direction, making it impossible to navigate without constant compass checks. The forest floor is a treacherous maze of fallen logs, hidden sinkholes, and slick rocks. "Vallon, you got a read on these coordinates?" Gibson asked as we pushed through a particularly dense thicket, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. I checked my GPS. Another 5 clicks northeast. Should reach the first disappearance site by nightfall. Miller trudged behind us, eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" he muttered. He was right. The silence was unnatural. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just the occasional drip of moisture from leaves and our own labored breathing. We made camp near a narrow stream as dusk settled. While Miller set up perimeter sensors, Gibson and I pored over satellite imagery and topographical maps. The missing persons had all disappeared within a 5-mile radius, but there was nothing obvious to explain it. No significant drops, no dangerous water features, just endless forest. "Heard stories about this place," Gibson said quietly as we huddled around the small, smokeless heater that passed for a campfire in covert ops. "Local tribes avoided it, called it the hollow ground." Miller snorted. "Great. More superstitious bullshit." "Maybe," I replied, feeling the weight of the forest's silence pressing down on us. "But something's not right here. Feel it?" They both nodded. We'd all been in enough tight spots to develop that sixth sense, that prickling awareness when something's off. The night pressed in like a physical presence. Our small camp felt insignificant beneath the towering trees, their branches creating a canopy that blocked even the faintest starlight. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the dim red glow of our equipment. I checked my watch, 23:45. My shift for watch was about to start. I signaled to Miller, who nodded gratefully and retreated to his sleeping bag. That's when I noticed it. A strange vibration in the air. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then I felt it in my teeth, a faint resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I tapped Gibson's shoulder. "You feel that?" His eyes widened slightly. He felt it too. Then the perimeter sensor on the eastern edge blinked red. "Movement," Gibson whispered, reaching for his rifle. I woke Miller with a quick shake. "We've got company." The three of us spread out, moving silently into predetermined positions. Through my night vision goggles, the forest appeared in an eerie green glow, shadows dancing between the trees. The vibration grew stronger, a low hum that seemed to resonate from the ground itself. My radio crackled with static. "See anything?" I whispered into the comm. No response, just more static. The humming intensified, vibrating in my bones. Then, suddenly it stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest. Even the stream seemed to quiet its gurgling. "Valen?" Gibson's voice came through the comm, unnaturally loud in the silence. 2 o'clock 50 meters. "There's something." His voice cut off with a strangled cry. "Gibson? Gibson!" I hissed into the comm. "Nothing." I signaled to Miller, and we converged on Gibson's last known position, moving quickly but cautiously through the underbrush. That's when we found it. The first body. Not Gibson's, someone else entirely. A hiker, based on the tattered remains of his clothing. He was draped over a fallen log as if placed there deliberately, his body torn open from sternum to pelvis. But it wasn't the violence of the killing that chilled me to the bone. It was the precision. The cuts were clean, methodical, almost surgical in their execution. And his face, God, his face, frozen in an expression of such profound terror that it barely looked human anymore. Miller retched quietly beside me. "Where's Gibson?" he whispered when he'd recovered. As if in answer, the humming began again, louder this time, emanating from somewhere to our right. And that's when I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees, larger than any animal had any right to be. I'd faced insurgents in the mountains of Afghanistan, cartel enforcers in Central America, and even a rabid mountain lion during training in Colorado. Nothing had prepared me for what emerged from between those ancient trees. It moved like liquid shadow, its form seeming to shift and ripple as it approached. In the green glow of my night vision, I could make out a massive frame, easily 9 feet tall. Its limbs were impossibly long and thin, ending in what looked like elongated fingers or claws. But it was the head that sent ice through my veins. Imagine a deer skull, bleached white by the sun and enlarged to grotesque proportions. No eyes filled those empty sockets, just hollow, depthless voids that somehow seemed to focus directly on us. Its mouth, Christ, that mouth, opened like a jagged tear across the lower portion of the skull, revealing row upon row of teeth that resembled sharpened bone fragments more than any natural dentition. "What the fuck is that?" Miller breathed beside me, his rifle already raised. The creature's head swiveled toward his voice with unnatural precision. The humming intensified, now so loud it made my teeth vibrate painfully. "Gibson," I called quietly into my comm one last time. A wet, gurgling noise answered me. Through the static I heard a single word: "Run." Miller fired first. 3 quick bursts that should have dropped anything living. The rounds hit the creature square in what would be its chest, but it didn't flinch, didn't stagger. The bullets seemed to pass through it as if it were made of smoke. "Fall back," I shouted, opening fire myself, aiming for the head. My rounds had no more effect than Miller's. The thing moved then, not with the lumbering gait its size would suggest, but with fluid, terrifying speed. One moment it was 20 yards away, the next it was on Miller. I'll never forget the sound he made. Not a scream, there wasn't time for that. Just a startled gasp that turned into a wet, choking noise as the creature's elongated fingers plunged into his throat. Miller's body jerked once, violently, then went limp. The creature didn't feed, didn't tear or rend. It simply held Miller's body for a moment, those empty sockets seeming to study him with cold curiosity, before dropping him like discarded trash. Then it turned to me. I fired my remaining rounds, knowing they were useless but unable to do anything else. When my rifle clicked empty, I drew my sidearm and continued firing until it too was spent. The creature cocked its head almost quizzically. The humming changed pitch, becoming almost melodic. It took a step toward me. Survival instinct kicked in. I ran. 20 years of military training, countless missions in hostile territory. and I ran like a terrified child. Shame would come later, if there was a later. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The humming followed, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind me, sometimes from the trees ahead. It was toying with me. I knew it with cold certainty. I stumbled into a small clearing, my lungs burning, legs trembling with exertion. My pack was gone, lost somewhere in the desperate flight. All I had was my combat knife and a single flare. The humming stopped. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing. I turned slowly, knife in hand, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Minutes stretched by. Had it lost interest, given up the chase? I didn't believe it for a second. My radio crackled to life. "Arthur," Gibson's voice, barely a whisper. "Arthur, help me." "Gibson," I hissed. "Where are you?" "I'm hurt bad." "By the stream. Hurry." I hesitated. It could be a trap. Probably was. But if Gibson was still alive, "Keep talking," I said. "I'll find you." "Hurry," the radio crackled. "It's coming back." I moved cautiously toward our campsite, every sense straining for signs of the creature. The forest remained eerily silent, no insects, no nightbirds, nothing. As I approached the stream, I saw a figure slumped against a boulder. Even in the darkness, I could tell it was Gibson. "Gibson!" I called softly, approaching with my knife ready. He didn't respond. I crouched beside him, shaking his shoulder gently. "Gibson, we need to move." His head lolled toward me, and I choked back a cry of horror. Gibson's face was intact, but utterly empty, mouth hanging open, eyes staring sightlessly, and where the back of his head should have been was nothing. A perfect cavity, scooped clean like the inside of a hollowed gourd. The radio in his hand crackled again. "Arthur!" Gibson's voice emerged from it. "Help me." But Gibson's lips didn't move. I dropped the radio as if it had burned me, backing away from Gibson's body. The humming returned, surrounding me, coming from everywhere at once. I fumbled for my flare, struck it, and held the blazing red light above my head. In its harsh glow, I could see them, not one creature, but three, positioned around the clearing, each identical, each watching me with those hollow, eyeless sockets. The closest one opened its mouth, that horrific, jagged maw, and from it came Gibson's voice. "Arthur? Why did you leave us?" "That's not possible," I whispered, the words escaping unbidden as I stared at the monstrosities surrounding me. The flare sizzled in my hand, casting crimson shadows across those bone-white, eyeless faces. The creatures remained perfectly still, unblinking, because what could blink without eyes? Watching me with an intensity I could feel like physical pressure. The one that had spoken, with Gibson's voice, took a slow step forward. Its movement was wrong, like watching film footage played at inconsistent speeds. One moment fluid, the next jerky and mechanical. "Arthur," it said again, but now the voice was changing, warping from Gibson's familiar baritone into something else, a discordant chorus, as if multiple voices were speaking simultaneously. "Why did you come here?" The flare's light caught something on the ground behind the creature. Gibson's pack, torn open, contents scattered. Among them gleamed our satellite phone, our only link to extraction. "What are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady while inching toward the pack. The creature cocked its head at an impossible angle, nearly 180 degrees. The humming intensified from the other two, forming a pattern that almost resembled language. "Echo," the first one said, its jaw moving unnaturally with the word. "We are Echo." "Echo of what?" I asked, taking another step toward the satellite phone. All three creatures moved in perfect synchronization, their skulls rotating to track my movement. The humming shifted pitch, becoming almost painful to hear. "Echo of hunger," came the reply, the words distorted and stretched. "Echo of emptiness." I lunged for the pack, fingers closing around the satellite phone. In the same instant, the nearest creature moved, that impossible, liquid-fast movement, and was suddenly before me, its elongated fingers wrapping around my wrist. Its touch was cold, colder than ice, colder than death, and where its skin met mine, I felt a horrible draining sensation, as if it were siphoning something fundamental from me. I slashed with my knife, the blade connecting with the creature's arm. It passed through with no resistance, as if cutting through fog, yet a viscous, black substance seeped from the wound, Not blood, but something thicker, like oil. The creature released me, recoiling slightly. The humming from all three intensified, becoming almost frantic. I scrambled backward, clutching the satellite phone. The creatures advanced in perfect unison, their movements synchronized like dancers in a macabre ballet. "Stay back," I shouted, fumbling with the phone. To my surprise, they paused, their heads tilted in identical angles, those empty sockets fixed on me with unsettling intensity. "You are different," the middle one said, now using Miller's voice. "You are full." "Full of what?" I asked, trying to keep them talking while I activated the phone behind my back. "Memory," came the reply, the words stretched and distorted. "Identity, self." The one on the left moved closer, its jaw working as if tasting the air. "We need what you have." Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. The hollowed head of Gibson's corpse, the missing hikers and hunters. These things weren't just killing, they were feeding, consuming something intangible. "What are you?" I asked again, backing toward the trees. "Hunger," all three replied in unison, their voices overlapping in a discordant chorus. "Empty. Always empty." They advanced another step. The satellite phone in my hand vibrated, indicating a connection. I had seconds at most. "You said I'm different," I said, trying to distract them. "Different how?" The creatures paused again, their heads swiveling to look at each other in a grotesque parody of human consultation. The humming between them changed cadence, becoming almost melodic. "Stronger," the one on the right finally said, this time in a voice I didn't recognize, probably one of the missing hikers. "Brighter, more filling." I pressed the emergency extraction code into the phone, praying it would transmit. "You've been here a long time," I guessed, watching their reactions. "Before the hikers. Before any of us." The humming intensified, resonating at a frequency that made my vision blur. "Always," they intoned together. "We are always." The middle one, the largest, suddenly lunged forward, moving with that impossible speed. I dodged, but not fast enough. Its elongated fingers grazed my temple, and where they touched, I felt that same draining sensation. Like pieces of myself being pulled away. Memories flashed before my eyes. Childhood moments, military training, faces of people I'd known. As if being rifled through by cold, alien fingers, I stumbled away, my head throbbing with pain. The creature made a sound, not a hum this time, but something like satisfaction. "Yes," it hissed, its jaw stretching impossibly wide. "More." I ran, blind panic overriding training, overriding everything except the primal need to escape. Behind me the humming rose to a crescendo and the forest itself seemed to respond, branches reaching like grasping fingers, roots lifting to trip me, the very air becoming thick and resistant. I crashed through the underbrush, the satellite phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. If the extraction team received my signal, they'd be at our original landing zone, 2 miles east. I just had to reach it. The humming followed, sometimes fading, sometimes intensifying, as if the creatures were all around me, hurting me. I broke through a dense thicket and found myself on the edge of a ravine. Below, a narrow stream glinted in the moonlight. Too far to jump, too steep to climb down quickly. The humming grew louder behind me. I turned to see all three creatures emerging from the trees, moving with that unnatural synchronicity. "Nowhere to go," they said in unison, their voices a dissonant chorus. "Nowhere to hide." I backed to the very edge of the ravine, loose stones skittering down into the darkness below. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, though I already knew the answer. "Everything," they replied. "All that you are." The largest one extended its hand, those elongated fingers reaching for my face. "We will make you hollow," it promised. Like us. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I did the only thing I could. I jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. Wind rushed past my ears, drowning out the humming that had pursued me through the forest. Then came the impact, not with the jagged rocks I'd expected, but with the icy waters of the stream below. The current was stronger than it had appeared from above, immediately pulling me under and downstream. I fought to the surface, gasping for air, the satellite phone somehow still clutched in my numb fingers. Above, silhouetted against the night sky, I could see the three creatures standing at the edge of the ravine, their skull-like heads tracking my movement. They made no attempt to follow. Perhaps they couldn't, or wouldn't, cross water. Small mercies. I let the current carry me for several hundred yards before fighting my way to the bank, collapsing on the rocky shore, shivering uncontrollably. My clothes were soaked, my pack was gone, and night temperatures in the Cascades could drop to near freezing. Hypothermia would kill me as surely as those things. If I didn't get moving, I checked the satellite phone, miraculously still functional, its military-grade casing having protected it from the water. The emergency signal was still transmitting. If anyone was listening, help would be heading to the extraction point. East. I needed to go east. I oriented myself using the stars visible through gaps in the canopy and began to move, staying close to the stream. Every shadow made me flinch. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. The forest, which had been unnaturally silent before, now seemed alive with small sounds. Or perhaps it was just my frayed nerves magnifying every whisper of wind. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small clearing dominated by a massive, lightning-struck tree. Its trunk was split down the middle, creating a natural shelter. I paused, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm me. Just a short rest, I told myself. 5 minutes to catch my breath. I wedged myself into the hollow of the broken tree, my back against solid wood, eyes fixed on the surrounding forest. The satellite phone clutched in one hand, my combat knife in the other. Despite my determination to stay alert, exhaustion pulled at me. My eyes grew heavy, my thoughts disjointed. Perhaps it was the cold, or the aftermath of adrenaline, but I felt myself drifting. Dreams came, vivid and disturbing. I dreamed of Gibson and Miller, their bodies moving through the forest with that same unnatural grace as the creatures, their eyes hollow sockets, their mouths opening too wide as they called my name. I dreamed of a time before humans, before civilization, when the ancient forests covered everything, and things moved in the deepest shadows that were neither animal nor spirit, but something in between. I dreamed of hunger. Endless, insatiable hunger. A sharp crack jolted me awake. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the canopy. I had slept for hours, not minutes. I cursed myself for the lapse and quickly scanned my surroundings. The forest seemed normal in the gray morning light. Just trees, undergrowth, the distant sound of the stream. The satellite phone buzzed in my hand. A message. Extraction confirmed. LZ Bravo. 0800 hours. LZ Bravo, our backup landing zone. A small meadow about a mile northeast of my current position. I checked my watch. 0637. I had just over an hour to reach it. I moved cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence as the growing daylight revealed nothing unusual. Perhaps the creatures were nocturnal. Perhaps they had given up the hunt. Either way, I wasn't about to waste the advantage. As I pushed through the forest, questions tumbled through my mind. What were those things? Had the military known about them when they sent us here? Were Gibson and Miller truly dead, or something worse? I had no answers, only the gnawing certainty that what I'd encountered went beyond anything in my experience or training. The terrain began to slope upward, and I recognized landmarks from our initial insertion. I was close to LZ Bravo. Relief surged through me, giving strength to my tired limbs. Then I heard it. Faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the morning breeze. That familiar humming. No, I whispered, scanning the forest wildly. Not now, not this close. The humming grew louder, coming from somewhere ahead of me. Between me and the extraction point. I froze, weighing my options. I could try to circle around, but that would take time I didn't have. I could wait, hope the extraction team would search for me if I missed the rendezvous. But after what happened to Gibson and Miller, would they risk it? No. I had to push forward. I moved as silently as possible, using every bit of my training to avoid detection. The humming seemed to shift position, sometimes to my left, sometimes right, as if trying to disorient me. Through a break in the trees, I caught a glimpse of the meadow. LZ Bravo, bathed in morning sunlight. So close. Less than 200 yards. The humming suddenly intensified, coming from directly behind me. I whirled, knife raised, to find myself face to face with one of the creatures. In daylight, it was even more horrifying. Its skin not black as I'd thought, but a mottled gray-white, like dead flesh. The hollow sockets of its skull-like head seemed to deepen as I watched, becoming endless pits. Found you, it said. using Gibson's voice. Cannot escape. I slashed with my knife more out of desperation than hope. To my surprise, the blade connected with solid resistance this time, drawing more of that viscous black substance. The creature recoiled, emitting a high-pitched keening that bore no resemblance to any of its previous sounds. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, sprinting toward the meadow with every ounce of strength I had left. Behind me, the keening changed to that multi-voiced chorus. No. Ours. Ours. I burst into the clearing, sunlight momentarily blinding me after the dimness of the forest. The meadow was empty, no helicopter, no extraction team. I checked my watch. 0752. I was early. The humming rose to a crescendo at the edge of the clearing. Not one creature now, but all three, emerging from different points around the meadow's perimeter. They moved cautiously, staying just within the tree line, as if reluctant to enter the open space. Sunlight. They didn't like direct sunlight. I moved to the center of the meadow, putting maximum distance between myself and the forest edge. The creatures paced along the perimeter, their movements agitated, their humming forming complex, overlapping patterns. Cannot have this one said, using Miller's voice. Too bright. Another added in a voice I didn't recognize. Wait, the third hissed. Night comes. Always. They were waiting for sunset. If the extraction team didn't arrive soon, a distant thumping sound reached my ears. Helicopter rotors. Relief washed over me like a physical force, nearly bringing me to my knees. The creatures heard it too. Their humming increased in volume and urgency, and they began to move faster around the perimeter, as if looking for a way to reach me before the helicopter arrived. The aircraft appeared over the eastern ridge. A Black Hawk, its dark silhouette a welcome sight against the morning sky. It banked sharply and descended toward the meadow, kicking up dust and grass. The creatures retreated slightly, their humming now barely audible over the rotor noise. But they didn't leave. They watched, those hollow sockets somehow conveying malevolence despite their emptiness. The helicopter touched down 30 yards from me. The side door slid open, revealing two heavily armed men in tactical gear. "Valen!" one shouted over the engine noise. "Move it!" I ran toward the helicopter, expecting at any moment to feel those cold, elongated fingers on my neck. The armed men provided covering fire, though what good bullets would do against those things I didn't know. I reached the helicopter and scrambled aboard, collapsing into a seat as the door gunner continued to scan the tree line. "Go! Go!" I shouted to the pilot. The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply away from the forest. Through the window, I caught a final glimpse of the clearing's edge, and the three creatures now fully visible in the morning light, their skull-like heads tilted upward, tracking our ascent. And despite the roar of the engines, I swear I could still hear that humming, following us into the sky. The debriefing lasted for 3 days. 3 days of the same questions, asked by different people in different ways. 3 days of trying to explain the unexplainable to increasingly skeptical faces. "Run through it again, Sergeant Fallon," the latest interrogator said. A civilian with a generic suit and an ID badge that identified him only as D. Marshall, Special Consultant. "I've told you everything," I replied, fatigue evident in my voice. "Multiple times." Marshall consulted his tablet. "These creatures you describe, humanoid but not human, with skull-like heads and abilities that defy conventional understanding. You realize how this sounds?" I'd been expecting this. The pivot from information gathering to discrediting. They'd asked for facts until they had enough to decide the facts weren't convenient. "I know exactly how it sounds," I said evenly. "I also know what I saw. What killed Gibson and Miller wasn't human, wasn't an animal, and wasn't a hallucination." Marshall sighed, setting aside his tablet. "Arthur. May I call you Arthur? Your service record is exemplary. 2 tours in Desert Storm, special operations in regions I'm not cleared to name, commendations from 3 different commanding officers. You're not a man who cracks under pressure." "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said, though I knew what was coming next. "But trauma affects everyone differently," he continued on cue. "Losing your team, being alone in hostile territory, the mind can play tricks, create explanations that help us process events too horrible to accept at face value." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. "You have my blood work. Any signs of hallucinogens, toxins, anything that would explain delusions?" Marshall hesitated. "No," he admitted, But stress alone doesn't make three men see the same thing, I cut in. Gibson and Miller saw them too before they died. You've mentioned that. Unfortunately, we only have your word for it. I sat back, suddenly tired of the whole charade. You've had search teams in the area since my extraction. Found anything? A flicker of something. Discomfort, concern, crossed Marshall's face. The recovery operation is ongoing. That's not an answer. Marshall gathered his papers, clearly preparing to end the session. Two more questions, then we're done for today. First, you mentioned these creatures spoke to you, used the voices of your teammates and possibly others, yet you also said they referred to themselves as echoes or hollow. Can you elaborate on what you believe they meant? I considered carefully before answering. They seemed empty, hungry for something they couldn't generate themselves. Identity maybe, memory, whatever makes us human. I paused. They were like vessels that needed filling. Marshall nodded, making a note. Last question. If these creatures were as dangerous as you describe, why do you think they let you live? The question hit a nerve I hadn't wanted to examine. Who says they did? Marshall's eyebrow rose. You're sitting here, aren't you? Am I? I asked quietly. They touched me, Marshall. Here. I tapped my temple. I felt something leave. Something important. Marshall studied me for a long moment, then closed his folder. We'll talk again tomorrow. But there was no tomorrow session. Instead, I was informed that my debriefing was complete, my mission classified, and I was being granted 30 days leave for recovery and reintegration. Translation, they wanted me gone, out of sight. While they decided what to do with me, I was escorted to the base perimeter, handed my personal effects, and all but pushed through the gate. No follow-up instructions, no contact information. Just the implicit understanding that I should keep my mouth shut. I rented a car and drove aimlessly for hours, eventually finding myself at a roadside motel that had seen better decades. The kind of place that asked no questions and expected none in return. In my sparse room, I finally allowed myself to think about what Marshall had asked. Why had they let me live? The creatures had Gibson and Miller within seconds once they chose to strike. What made me different? I stood before the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection as if it might hold answers. I looked thinner, paler, the dark circles under my eyes more pronounced, but fundamentally unchanged. Or was I? You are different, the creature had said. You are full. Full of what? Memory? Identity? And if they had taken something from me when they touched me, what was it? What part of myself was now missing? I pressed my fingers to my temple, where their cold touch had left no visible mark but a lingering sensation of absence. That night, I dreamed of the forest again. But this time, I moved through it differently, gliding rather than walking, perceiving rather than seeing. The humming wasn't external but came from within me, a language I almost understood. I woke drenched in sweat, the humming still resonating in my mind. Over the next weeks, the dreams continued, each more vivid than the last. And with them came changes. Subtle at first. Food tasting different. Colors seeming brighter. Sounds carrying meanings beyond words. Then more pronounced. Knowing what people would say before they spoke. Sensing emotions that weren't expressed. Seeing patterns that had always been invisible to me before. I began to avoid mirrors. On the 28th day of my leave, the phone in my motel room rang. The first call I'd received since arriving. Valen. I answered. Arthur. Marshall's voice. We need to talk. About what? A pause. There's been another incident. Same area. Different team. My heart quickened. Casualties? 2 dead. 1 missing. And let me guess. The reports mentioned tall, skeletal figures and a strange humming sound. Marshall's silence was confirmation enough. You're going back in, he said finally. With a specialized team. Tomorrow. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Why would I do that? Because you survived once. Because you understand what we're dealing with. No, I said. I don't think I do. Not really. Another pause. There's something else. The search teams found a pattern. All the incidents, the hikers, the hunters, your team, the new casualties, they all occurred within a 5-mile radius of a particular location, a cave system that doesn't appear on any geological survey. And we believe it's their home, for lack of a better word. We're going to seal it. The humming in my mind intensified. as if responding to Marshall's words. I gripped the phone tighter. "That won't work," I said, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. "Why not?" "Because they're not. From here. The cave might be a doorway, but closing it won't matter. They'll find another way." Marshall sighed. "We have to try something, Arthur. People are dying." I closed my eyes, seeing again those hollow, eyeless sockets. Feeling again that cold touch, that draining sensation. "I'll meet your team," I said finally. "But not to go back in. To tell them what they're really facing." "And what's that?" Marshall asked. I looked toward the mirror across the room, half expecting to see one of those skull-like faces staring back at me. Instead, I saw only my own reflection, gaunt, haunted, but still recognizably me. "For now, echoes," I said quietly. "Hungry echoes looking for something to fill their emptiness. And when they find it, they multiply." "What are you saying, Arthur?" I traced my fingers over my temple, where their touch had left its invisible mark. Where something had been taken, or perhaps where something had been left behind. "I'm saying be careful who you send back to those woods, Marshall. Be very careful." I hung up before he could respond, the humming in my mind now a constant, almost comforting presence. I moved to the window, looking out at the night sky, at stars that suddenly seemed closer, more knowable than they had any right to be. Something had changed within me. I knew it with a certainty that transcended rational thought. The forest had marked me, claimed a piece of me, or perhaps given me something in return. I packed my meager belongings, paid for the room in cash, and drove away from the motel before Marshall could send someone to collect me. I wasn't ready to face what they had planned. Not yet. Instead, I headed west, toward the coast. Away from the mountains, away from those ancient trees and what lurked among them. I needed space, clarity, time to understand what was happening to me. I found a small fishing town on the Pacific, the kind of place where strangers were noticed but not questioned. I rented a cabin overlooking the ocean, the constant roar of waves a welcome replacement for the humming that still echoed in my mind during quiet moments. Days passed. I walked the beaches, watched the tides, tried to reconnect with the world of normal people living normal lives. Sometimes it almost worked, but the dreams continued. Each night I returned to those woods. Sometimes I was myself, running from the creatures. Sometimes I was something else entirely, moving through the forest with that fluid, unnatural grace, hunger driving me forward. I would wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my throat raw as if from humming. On the 7th day I received a package. No return address, no note inside, just a thin file containing satellite images of the area where we'd encountered the creatures, and a USB drive. The images showed the cave system Marshall had mentioned, a dark mouth in the earth surrounded by dense forest. Thermal imaging revealed nothing unusual, no heat signatures, no movement, just emptiness. The USB drive contained a single video file, footage from a body camera. The timestamp showed it was from 3 days after my extraction. The footage showed a heavily armed search team moving through the same forest where I'd lost Gibson and Miller. Their movements were cautious, professional. These were experienced operators. They approached a rocky outcropping that concealed the entrance to a cave. "Command, we've reached the target location," the team leader said. Preparing to enter, the camera panned across the cave entrance, a jagged tear in the rock face, darkness beyond. Nothing visibly threatening, just a cave. They entered, tactical lights illuminating a narrow tunnel that descended steeply. The rock walls were smooth, almost polished, with strange markings that might have been natural erosion patterns or something deliberately carved. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The team spread out, lights sweeping across the space. It was empty. No creatures, no signs of habitation, just bare rock and silence. "Place is clean," one of the team members reported. "No signs of..." Wait, what's that? The camera turned toward what looked like a pile of discarded clothing in one corner. As they approached, the pile resolved into human remains, desiccated, partially mummified, as if all moisture had been extracted. "Command, we've got bodies, multiple. Looks like they've been here a while." The team leader knelt beside the remains, examining them without touching. No visible cause of death, no trauma. "They look preserved." Another team member called from across the chamber. "Sir, you need to see this." The camera moved to another section of the cave, where the rock wall was covered in markings, definite carvings this time, crude but unmistakable. human figures with elongated limbs and hollow skull-like heads. "These look old," someone murmured. "Really old." The team leader reached out to touch one of the carvings. "Command, are you seeing this? We need archaeological." A faint humming began, barely audible at first, then growing in intensity. "What is that?" someone asked. The team tensed, weapons raised, scanning the chamber. "Fall back," the team leader ordered. Now, they began retreating toward the tunnel entrance. The humming grew louder, seeming to come from the very rock around them. Then the camera caught movement, a shadow detaching from the wall, then another. Not coming from outside, but emerging from the stone itself, as if the rock were turning liquid and flowing into those familiar, horrific forms. The footage became chaotic, shouting, gunfire, the camera jerking wildly as its wearer ran, glimpses of those skull-like heads, those impossibly long limbs, team members falling, some firing to the last, others simply stopping, standing motionless as the creatures approached. The last clear image was of the team leader, backing toward the cave entrance, still firing though it clearly had no effect. 3 creatures advanced on him, moving with that unnatural synchronicity. Their jaws opened, wider than should be possible, and from them came a sound, not the humming this time, but voices, human voices, overlapping. "Join us. Become." Echo. Then the screen went black. End of footage. I sat in silence, the implications settling over me like a shroud. The creatures weren't just hunting in those woods, they were emerging from the very land itself. Ancient, patient, hungry, and they were spreading. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Unknown number. "Valen," I answered cautiously. "Arthur," Marshall's voice. "We know you received the package." Of course they did. "What do you want from me?" "Understanding," he replied, surprising me. "The operation failed. Spectacularly. We're beyond conventional approaches now." "You mean weapons?" "I mean everything we've tried. Nothing affects these things. Nothing stops them." I closed my eyes, seeing again those hollow sockets, feeling that cold touch. "What do you expect me to do about it?" "They let you live, Arthur," Marshall said quietly. "They touched you but didn't take you, not completely. We need to know why." The humming in my mind intensified, almost drowning out Marshall's voice. My hand went instinctively to my temple. "Maybe they did take me," I said. "Just not in a way you can see." A long pause. "What does that mean?" I looked out at the ocean, the endless rhythm of waves crashing against the shore. So different from the stillness of those ancient forests, yet connected. Everything connected. Patterns within patterns. I could see it now, in a way I couldn't before. "It means I'm changing," I admitted finally. "Since that night. Dreams, perceptions, awareness of things I shouldn't be able to sense." Another pause, longer this time. "We suspected as much," Marshall said finally. "The medical data from your debriefing showed anomalies. Brain activity patterns we couldn't explain. And you let me walk out? We were monitoring you. Still are, obviously. We needed to see what would happen." Anger flared. "The Department of Interior doesn't tell you about the silence. When I applied to the National Park Service 12 years ago, the job description emphasized resource management, visitor education, and emergency response. Standard government language that failed to capture what happens when darkness falls across 200,000 acres of wilderness and you're the only human for 30 miles in any direction." I still remember my first night at Blackwater Ridge Station. The small cabin that would be my home for the next 6 months sat perched on the edge of a sheer cliff, offering a commanding view of the valley below. The watchtower above it rose another 40 feet into the air, a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the stars. "You'll get used to the quiet," Ranger Morris had told me during orientation. The weathered lines around his eyes deepened as he spoke. "Most rangers do. The ones that don't, well, they don't last long out here." Morris had been the senior ranger at Blackwater for 23 years. His transfer request came through just 2 days after he'd trained me. I never saw him again. That first night I discovered what he meant about the silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. The wilderness is never truly silent. It was something deeper, a void that seemed to swallow not just noise but thought itself. I sat on the cabin's small porch, listening to the wind whisper through pine needles, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft rustling of nocturnal creatures, and beneath it all a silence that listened back. The training manual covered standard protocols: lost hikers, wildlife encounters, forest fires. Nothing about the way certain valleys seem to absorb sound like a sponge. Nothing about the strange rock formations that locals refuse to discuss. Nothing about the footprints I would find later, 18 inches long, deeply pressed into hard soil as if made by something impossibly heavy. The forest has its own rules, Morris had said cryptically before he left. He handed me a worn copy of a horror novel, some obscure title about ancient woods and the things that dwell in them. Might want to read this. For entertainment, of course. He'd laughed, but there was no humor in it. I didn't understand then. I was still bright-eyed, eager to protect this slice of American wilderness. I'd studied forestry and wildlife management, spent summers as a trail guide. I thought I knew what awaited me. I was wrong. My first rescue operation came 3 weeks into the job. A family of 4 had wandered off the main trail, a common enough occurrence. Their emergency beacon activated near Deadfall Creek, about 7 miles from my station. I gathered my gear and set out just as dusk began to settle over the mountains. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound that didn't belong. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. It echoed across the valley, bouncing between rock faces until it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The radio at my hip crackled to life. Blackwater Station, this is dispatch. Be advised we've lost contact with the Reynolds family. Last transmission mentioned someone watching them from the trees. Over. I keyed the radio. Copy that. ATA 20 minutes to their last known. Over. Proceed with caution, Blackwater. There have been incidents in that sector before. Over. The dispatcher's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just another lost hiker situation. As I followed the narrow trail down into the valley, shadows lengthened around me. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of darkness. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the gloom, catching occasional glimpses of eyes reflecting back, too high up to be deer, too large to be owls. I found the family huddled beside Deadfall Creek, their faces pale with terror. The father clutched a hunting knife, while the mother held the children close. Something's out there, the man whispered when I approached. Been stalking us for hours. Too big to be a bear. I scanned the tree line, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment I caught sight of something, a massive shadow moving between the pines. The beam reflected off eyes nearly 8 feet off the ground, glowing red for an instant before disappearing. We need to move, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Now, as we made our way back toward the main trail, the forest around us fell into that unnatural silence I'd come to recognize. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling, just the sound of our breathing and footfalls. That was my first encounter. I didn't know then that it would be one of many, or that some of the people I was sent to rescue wouldn't be so lucky. The horror novel Morris gave me sits on my shelf now, its pages dog-eared and annotated. Not fiction, I realized later. A field guide. Winter came early that year, dropping 3 feet of snow before November ended. The park emptied of visitors, leaving me alone with the mountains and whatever watched from the trees. Radio contact became spotty. Supply drops came less frequently. Time stretched like taffy in the isolation. I fell into a routine. Morning perimeter checks, afternoon patrols along accessible trails, evenings spent logging data and monitoring weather patterns. Every 3 days I'd climb the watchtower to scan the valley with high-powered binoculars, checking for smoke or distress signals. It was during one of these observation sessions that I spotted them, a line of tracks cutting across a meadow 2 miles east of the station. Even from a distance, I could tell they didn't belong to any recognized wildlife. The stride length alone was impossible for known species. I should have radioed it in. Protocol demanded documentation of unusual findings. Instead, I closed the logbook without recording the observation. Some things shouldn't exist in official records. The next morning, I geared up to investigate. The temperature had dropped overnight, hovering around 15 degrees, the sky a hard, cloudless blue. I strapped on snowshoes, packed emergency supplies, and loaded my service pistol, a precaution I'd never before felt necessary. The meadow lay silent under its blanket of snow, pristine except for those tracks, deep impressions that punched through the crust to the soil beneath. I knelt beside one, placing my gloved hand inside for scale. My fingers barely spanned half its width. Sasquatch? In my scientific career? I whispered to myself with nervous laughter that didn't reach my eyes. The sound died in the cold air. I followed the tracks to the tree line where they disappeared into dense forest. Something made me pause before entering the woods. Some primal instinct for self-preservation. Instead, I photographed the prints, took measurements, and collected soil samples from the depressions. That night in the cabin, I spread my findings across the desk. The photos showed clear dermal ridge patterns, like fingerprints, but on a massive scale. The soil samples contained hair follicles unlike any I'd cataloged before. I reached for the radio, then hesitated. What would I say? That Bigfoot was wandering through my sector? I'd be pulled from duty, probably sent for psychological evaluation. A sharp crack from outside interrupted my thoughts. Something heavy moved across the porch. The wooden planks groaned under substantial weight. I froze, hand hovering over my sidearm. Tap, tap, tap. Against the window, not knuckles, not claws. Something deliberate. I held my breath as a shadow passed across the frosted glass. Massive, bipedal, but not human in its proportions. The door handle rattled gently, testing. I'd secured the deadbolt earlier, a habit I'd developed since arriving at Blackwater. Thank God for small mercies. The radio suddenly hissed with static, making me jump. Through the white noise came a garbled transmission. Watching. 7 foot, not alone. Then nothing. I spent the night in the watchtower, service pistol in hand, watching as something large moved through the trees surrounding my cabin. It never fully emerged into the clearing, staying just within the tree line, watching, waiting. In the morning, I found new tracks circling the cabin and a large handprint pressed against the window. 5 fingers, but proportioned wrong, the thumb set too low on the palm. I photographed everything, sealed the evidence in plastic bags, and buried it all beneath the floorboards of the cabin. Not in the official record. Not something the Department of Interior would want to acknowledge. 3 days later, the first missing hiker report came through. A solo backpacker, last seen headed toward Deadfall Creek. I stared at the coordinates on the radio transmission, my blood running cold. The tracks had been heading in that same direction. The search for the missing backpacker, Eric Malone, 27, experienced outdoorsman from Colorado, lasted 6 days. We found his campsite ransacked, his equipment scattered across 50 yards of forest. The tent had been torn apart from the inside, as if he desperately cut his way out in the night. The other rangers talked about bears or mountain lions, but I saw their expressions when they examined the scene. Nobody mentioned the strange bipedal tracks circling the campsite, or the tufts of unidentifiable hair caught on tree bark 8 feet above ground level. Seen anything unusual up at Blackwater? Ranger Cooper asked me as we packed up the search gear. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Define unusual, I replied. You know what I mean. She lowered her voice. The old-timers call this the dark season, when the days get short and the nights get cold. When things move around more freely. I remembered Morris's hasty departure. I've heard some sounds, I admitted. Found some tracks. Cooper nodded. Keep it to yourself. Management doesn't want to hear it. They'll transfer you to a gift shop in Yellowstone if you start filing reports about, well, you know. Is that what happened to Morris? She glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. Morris saw something up close last season, started drinking heavily. They found him trying to burn down his own cabin one night, babbling about smoking them out. That's why they rushed you in as replacement. The revelation sat cold in my stomach. Why didn't anyone warn me? Would you have believed it? She gave me a sad smile. Besides, not everyone experiences the same things. Some rangers spend 20 years here and never see anything strange. Others last a month before. She trailed off. Before what? Before they vanish. Or worse, before they come back different. We never found Eric Malone. His case file remains open, classified as a probable wildlife attack. His parents still call the station sometimes, hoping for updates. I never tell them about the dreams I have. Dreams where Eric stumbles through endless forest pursued by a shadow that walks on 2 legs but isn't human. The weeks following the disappearance were quiet. Too quiet. I patrolled my sector with renewed vigilance, cataloging every unusual sign, broken trees too high for natural causes, strange vocalizations in the night, areas where animals refused to enter. I began researching, pulling records from nearby stations, combing through incident reports dating back decades. A pattern emerged. Clusters of disappearances every 7 to 10 years, always during late fall or early winter, always preceded by unusual wildlife behavior and unexplained sounds. The cabin became my fortress. I installed extra locks, covered windows at night, kept a fire burning constantly. The novel Morris had given me became my companion, its fictional account of ancient forest entities now reading like a field manual. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, I woke to absolute silence. No wind, no distant howls of wolves, nothing. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. The radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. Help! Seeing them everywhere, not human. I recognized Cooper's voice. Tight with fear, I keyed the mic. "Cooper, this is Blackwater. What's your location?" "Over." Static hissed back at me for several seconds before her voice returned, now eerily calm. "Never mind, Blackwater. False alarm. Must have been dreaming. Over and out." Something in her tone raised the hairs on my neck. Cooper never said over and out. It was a protocol violation she routinely mocked others for using. I tried calling her back, but the radio remained silent. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Shadows deepened beyond my windows despite no change in the moonlight. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps circling the cabin. Not one set but many. Moving in perfect synchronization. Tap, tap, tap. All around me. I grabbed my rifle and climbed to the watchtower. Through night vision binoculars, I scanned the tree line. They stood at the edge of the forest. Tall, broad figures. Not quite human in proportion. 7 of them, perfectly still, arranged in a semicircle facing the cabin. Watching, waiting. As dawn approached, they melted back into the trees. I waited until full daylight before venturing outside, where I found a perfect circle of those massive footprints surrounding the cabin, and something placed deliberately at each compass point: north, south, east, west. Tufts of human hair, one blonde, one red, one black, one gray. I recognized the red immediately. Cooper wore her hair in a distinctive braid. The radio remained silent that day. When I finally got through to Central Dispatch, they reported all rangers had checked in normally, including Cooper. January brought blizzards that isolated Blackwater Station for weeks at a time. The radio became my only connection to the outside world, though transmissions grew increasingly unreliable. Static consumed most messages, allowing only fragments to break through. I began recording these transmissions, playing them back at different speeds, filtering out background noise. Patterns emerged in the static itself, rhythmic pulses that didn't match any known interference pattern, buried within the white noise, barely perceptible. Whispers. I couldn't make out words exactly, but the cadence suggested language, something being communicated beneath the threshold of normal hearing. I became obsessed with decoding these messages, staying up through the night with headphones pressed to my ears, transcribing what might have been words. Coming, closer. Hunger. Watch. Sleep deprivation played tricks on my mind. I knew that. Yet the whispers persisted even when I rested properly. They seemed to know when I was listening, growing stronger when my attention focused on them, fading when I tried to record them for others. One night, during a particularly fierce storm, the radio activated on its own. Through howling static came a voice I recognized. "Eric Malone, the missing hiker, can see my campsite from here. Something watching from the trees. Please send." The transmission cut off abruptly. I checked the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. I tried to respond, but the channel remained dead. The next morning, I skied out to the nearest emergency phone box, 5 miles through deep snow. When I finally connected with regional headquarters, I reported the transmission. "That's impossible," the dispatcher said flatly. "That search was months ago, and there's no way his radio would still have power." "I know what I heard," I insisted. A long pause followed. "We're sending someone to check on you at Blackwater. ETA tomorrow morning, weather permitting." "I don't need checking on," I snapped. "I need someone to investigate that transmission." "It's already been logged," came the practiced response. "Someone will review it." I knew what that meant. Filed and forgotten, the system protecting itself from uncomfortable realities. The promised visit never happened. The storm intensified overnight, blocking all access roads to my station. I was on my own. That night, I dreamed of Eric Malone walking through endless snow, following disembodied whispers that led him deeper into the forest. Behind him, massive shadows moved between trees, herding him forward. In the dream, he turned once, looking directly at me with eyes that reflected red in the darkness. "They can wear us," he said, his voice the same as on the radio. "Like clothes." I woke gasping, the room cold despite the wood stove's efforts. The radio hissed quietly on my desk, though I knew I'd turned it off before sleeping. "Wearing us. Coming for you next." I grabbed the radio, fully awake now. "Who is this? Identify yourself." The static cleared momentarily. "It's Cooper. I'm outside your station. Let me in, it's freezing out here." I froze. Cooper's station was over 30 miles away, inaccessible in current conditions. "Cooper, what's your exact location?" "I'm on your porch. I can see you through the window." "Let me in." I stood in the cabin's main room. No windows faced my position. No one could see me. A heavy knock rattled the door. "I know you're in there," Cooper's voice called, now from outside rather than the radio. "I'm hurt. I need help." I crept to the window, staying to the side to peer through a crack in the curtains. A figure stood on my porch, the right height and build for Cooper, wearing a ranger's winter jacket, but it stood oddly, weight distributed wrong, arms hanging too low. "Last chance, not Cooper," called, voice suddenly deeper, distorted. "Let me in or I'll come in anyway." I backed away from the window, rifle raised. "Cooper would know the access protocol," I called. "Identify yourself properly." A sound came then. Not quite laughter, not quite a growl. The porch boards creaked as the figure moved closer to the door. "We've warned so many of you over the years," it said, Cooper's voice now completely gone. "Your friend fought harder than most. The young man too, the one who camped where he shouldn't." The door handle turned slowly, testing the lock. "But you," it continued, "you've been watching us back. You understand what we are. You'd make a better fit than most." I fired a warning shot through the door. The sound was deafening in the small cabin. Silence followed, then soft footsteps retreating. When I dared look outside hours later, I found a trail of footprints leading back to the forest, starting as ranger boots, then halfway across the clearing, transforming into those massive, inhuman tracks. Cooper reported for duty as scheduled the next day according to dispatch. When I described the night's events, they suggested I take medical leave. Instead, I began preparing. Whatever these things were, they were watching, waiting, testing. And I was alone on their hunting ground. February's thaw brought brief respite from isolation. A supply helicopter managed to land in the clearing beside Blackwater Station, bringing provisions and human contact that felt alien after months alone. The pilot, Davidson, eyed me nervously as I helped unload crates. "You okay, man? You look like hell." I'd lost weight. My beard had grown wild. I probably smelled like someone who'd been burning sage and cedar in every room I had. "Just winter isolation," I said with forced casualness. "How are things out there in civilization?" He shrugged. "Same old, though there's been some weird chatter about this region lately." I froze in the act of lifting a box. What kind of chatter? Search and rescue picked up some strange emergency signals. When they investigated, they found campsites abandoned but intact, like people just walked away from all their gear. He lowered his voice. One site had a journal. Last entry mentioned red eyes watching from the trees and voices that sound like friends calling. My heart pounded. What else? Davidson glanced toward the forest edge. "Cooper's been acting weird since returning from that search operation for the backpacker. Keeps requesting assignment to this area specifically. Insisted on coming with me today actually, but got pulled for another emergency last minute." I hadn't told him about my visitor claiming to be Cooper. "Has anyone checked on the backpacker's family? The Malones?" Davidson frowned. "That's the other thing. Mrs. Malone reported getting calls from her son's number. When she answers, she just hears forest sounds and whispering. Tech traced the calls to somewhere in this valley, but that's impossible. No cell service out here." "How many people missing now?" I asked quietly. "Officially? 3 this season. Unofficially." He shook his head. "Rangers talk. Something's happening in these woods." After Davidson left, I inventoried the supplies, finding an unexpected package, a satellite phone with a note, "For emergencies only. Signal might not penetrate in all areas. Cooper." I immediately attempted to call out. No signal, despite clear skies. I climbed to the watchtower and tried again. 3 bars. Progress. I called regional headquarters and asked for Cooper. "Ranger Cooper is on 2 weeks leave," came the response. Family emergency. When did this happen? Yesterday morning. She left rather suddenly. I felt sick. Can you check something for me? Has anyone requested transfer to Blackwater Station recently? A pause, keyboard clicking. Yes, actually. Cooper put in for rotation to your location starting next month. Said you two had already discussed it. We hadn't. I ended the call and stood watching the forest as afternoon faded toward evening. In the valley below, shadows lengthened. With the binoculars, I scanned methodically grid by grid. There, at the edge of Deadfall Creek, a flash of khaki, a Park Service uniform. Through the powerful lenses, I could make out Cooper's red hair, her familiar gait as she moved along the creek bed, 30 miles from where she should be, in terrain impassable without serious mountaineering equipment. I watched as she stopped and looked up, directly at my position, though I should have been invisible at this distance. She raised an arm and waved. The satellite phone rang in my hand, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. "Hello?" I answered, eyes still fixed on the distant figure. "It's Cooper," came her voice, slightly distorted. "I can see you watching me." I swallowed hard. "Where are you?" "You know exactly where I am. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about what's happening in the woods. Regional says you're on family leave." A pause. "They're lying to you. They know what's out here. They've always known." Through the binoculars, I could see her lips moving in sync with the words. "Impossible at this distance." "What's the access protocol, Cooper?" I asked, hand moving to my sidearm. Another pause. "What?" "Standard security question. What's the emergency access protocol for ranger stations?" The figure by the creek tilted its head at an unnatural angle. "Does it matter? I'm not trying to access your station. I'm trying to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "They're not just watching anymore, they're replacing us. One by one. Harrison from East Ridge is gone. The thing wearing his skin requested transfer to headquarters last week." My mouth went dry. "How do I know you're really Cooper?" The figure slowly raised both arms out to its sides. Even through the binoculars, I couldn't quite make out its face clearly. Always slightly blurred, as if refusing to come into focus. "You don't," it said simply. "That's the point. None of us can trust anyone anymore. But I can prove I'm trying to help you." "How?" "Look in the supply crate marked Communications. There's a false bottom. Under it, you'll find a file. Read it, then burn it." The call ended. Below, the figure turned and walked into the forest, moving with impossible speed until it vanished among the trees. I found the crate and, sure enough, discovered a hidden compartment containing a weatherproof case. Inside lay a file stamped classified and dated 1978. The title made my blood run cold. "Blackwater Phenomenon. Ongoing Assessment and Containment Protocol." The document detailed decades of observations matching exactly what I'd experienced. The department had known all along. This wasn't just my station, my valley. This was happening throughout the region, carefully documented then deliberately hidden. The final page contained a map with red circles indicating high-activity zones, areas where hikers disappeared most frequently. Blackwater Station sat directly in the center of the largest circle, not a ranger station at all, a monitoring post, an observation blind, and I was the bait. The classified file changed everything. According to its contents, the entities in the forest had been studied secretly for decades. They weren't considered animals or humans, but something else entirely. Ancient inhabitants that predated human settlement, with the ability to mimic human appearance and voice. The file called them mimics. They couldn't maintain the disguise perfectly. There were tells. Proportions slightly wrong. Difficulties with complex language patterns. And the eyes, in any light, their eyes reflected red. Most disturbing was the pattern of behavior. They didn't just kill their victims. They studied them first, learning their mannerisms, voices, relationships. Then they would replace them, infiltrating human communities to find more subjects. Not for food, apparently, but for something the file called essence transference. The government knew, had always known. Ranger stations like mine were dual purpose, providing actual park services while monitoring mimic activity. Some rangers were informed of their true purpose. Others, like me, were kept in the dark, our reactions providing valuable observational data. I felt sick reading it. Betrayed. Expendable. The file indicated that mimic activity followed cycles, with intensive phases occurring every 7 to 10 years. We were currently in the most active phase recorded since 1978. The final page contained emergency protocols, including a radio frequency not listed in standard Ranger documentation. In case of containment failure, I was to transmit a specific code that would trigger immediate evacuation of all stations within 50 miles, followed by measures I could only interpret as a scorched earth response. I memorized the frequency and code, then burned the file as instructed. That night, I prepared. I couldn't trust the radio anymore, or the satellite phone. I couldn't trust anyone who might come to the station. I was on my own until spring thaw allowed me to hike out, still weeks away. I set up tripwires around the cabin perimeter, connected to simple noise alarms. I prepared defensive positions with clear sight lines to all approaches. I rationed supplies, planning for a longer isolation than originally anticipated. As darkness fell, I climbed to the watchtower for my usual surveillance. The valley lay peaceful below, moonlight gleaming off snow-covered slopes. Through night vision binoculars, I methodically scanned the terrain. Movement caught my eye near the eastern ridge, a line of figures moving through the trees, not attempting to hide, walking with purpose toward my position. I counted 7 distinct shapes. Some moved like humans, others loped forward with unnatural gaits. All were roughly person-sized. The radio crackled to life behind me. I'd left it on the emergency frequency mentioned in the file. Blackwater Station, this is Regional Command Actual. We've detected multiple intrusions in your sector. Satellite thermal showing 7 signatures converging on your position. Do you copy? This wasn't the usual dispatcher. The voice had military crispness. I copy, I responded. I have visual confirmation. Implement Protocol Red Eye immediately. Repeat, Protocol Red Eye. Reinforcement ETA 40 minutes by air. Hold your position. I keyed the mic. Copy that. Protocol Red Eye initiated. I had no idea what Protocol Red Eye entailed. It hadn't been in the file, but I wasn't about to admit that. I returned to the binoculars. The figures had crossed the meadow and now stood at the tree line surrounding the cabin clearing. Even with night vision, I couldn't make out details. They remained shadow-like, indistinct. One stepped forward, then another. Soon all 7 stood in the open, moonlight illuminating them clearly. My breath caught. Cooper stood directly before my cabin. Beside her, Eric Malone. Then Ranger Morris. Davidson, the pilot. 2 hikers I recognized from missing persons reports. And the 7th, me. My own face, my build, my Ranger uniform. Perfect in every detail. They formed a semicircle, looking up at the watchtower where I stood. 7 pairs of eyes reflecting red in my binocular lenses. The thing wearing my face smiled and waved. The radio hissed again. Blackwater, be advised. Hostiles have breached outer perimeter, 40 yards from main structure. Protocol Red Eye authorizes lethal force. Repeat, you are authorized for lethal measures. I raised my rifle, sighting down on the doppelganger wearing my face. Through the scope, I could see its expression, not threatening, but sad, almost sympathetic. My finger hesitated on the trigger. The radio erupted with static, then cleared. A new voice spoke. My own voice. You won't shoot. You want to understand us first. That's why you were perfect. I glanced at the radio, then back to my double below. Its lips weren't moving. We've been here longer than your kind, the voice continued. This was our place before humans came with their boundaries and badges. We watched, we learned, we adapted. What do you want? I asked, knowing they could hear me. To survive, to expand, the same as your kind. A pause. The others coming to rescue you, they don't want to save you. They want to eliminate witnesses, both human and non-human. A distant thudding sound reached my ears. Helicopter rotors approaching. We can offer you something they can't, my voice said from the radio. The truth. About this place. About what's really happening. About what you've been part of without knowing. Below, the 7-figure. I've been driving trucks for a solid 15 years, logging hours on highways, back roads, and dirt trails across this country. The name's Donnell Hawkins, and what I'm about to tell you happened on May 12, 2003. A date burned into my memory like a cattle brand. That night, I was hauling lumber from Oregon down to Reno. Just another routine job. The cab of my Peterbilt felt like home, more familiar than my actual apartment back in Boise. The dashboard lights cast a soft green glow across my hands as they gripped the wheel. My knuckles whitened from 15 straight hours on the road. Northern Nevada stretched before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through darkness. The headlights carved twin tunnels through the night, illuminating nothing but empty road and the occasional reflective marker. My radio played Willie Nelson low enough that I could still hear the rhythmic thrum of tires against pavement and the steady diesel rumble beneath me. It was approaching midnight, that strange liminal hour when the world feels suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. The moon hung low and yellow in the sky, casting long shadows across the scrubland that flanked the highway. I'd passed the state line maybe 30 miles back, and hadn't seen another vehicle for at least 40 minutes. That stretch of US 95 is desolate on the best of nights. On this particular evening, it felt abandoned, like I was the last person alive in a forgotten corner of America. The isolation never bothered me before. It was part of the job, part of the freedom, but something felt different tonight. A heaviness in the air, a tension I couldn't explain. My high beams caught something at the roadside ahead. At first I thought it was roadkill, maybe a deer or coyote. As I drew closer though, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human. A body, sprawled face down on the gravel shoulder. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, easing off the accelerator. Every trucker knows the code. You see something, someone who might need help, you stop. No questions asked. I pulled over, the air brakes hissing like a warning as the rig came to rest about 20 yards past the figure. The sudden silence when I cut the engine was profound, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, checked that my phone was in my pocket, and climbed down from the cab. The night air hit me like a slap, cold for May, carrying the scent of sage and dust. My boots crunched on gravel as I approached the body, the beam of light bouncing with each step. "Hey buddy, you all right?" I called out, already knowing I wouldn't get an answer. The man lay motionless, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath him. His clothes, what looked like a leather jacket and jeans, were torn and soaked with something dark that glistened wetly in my flashlight beam. Blood, too much blood. I knelt beside him, 2 fingers pressed against his neck. His skin was cold, waxy to the touch. No pulse, rigor mortis had already set in. This man had been dead for hours. Standing back up, I swept the flashlight across the surrounding area. No skid marks on the road, no debris from a crash, no abandoned vehicle. Just the body, dumped like trash on this forgotten stretch of highway. My throat tightened as I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the keypad. That's when I heard it, the sound of an approaching vehicle. Headlights appeared on the horizon, growing rapidly larger as they approached. I raised a hand to shield my eyes from the glare, expecting them to speed past. Instead, the vehicle, a dark sedan, American-made, maybe a Crown Victoria or similar, screeched to a halt beside my truck. The driver's door flew open before the car had fully stopped. A man emerged, his silhouette backlit by his own headlights. He was massive, 6'4" at least, with shoulders like a linebacker. His head was shaved clean, and even in the dim light I could make out a network of tattoos creeping up from his collar to his jawline. But what froze my blood wasn't his size or his appearance. It was the gun in his right hand, pointed squarely at my chest. "Back the fuck off," he growled, his voice like gravel being crushed. "This ain't your business." The gun didn't waver as he took a step toward me, moonlight glinting off what looked like a stainless steel semi-automatic. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat echoing in my ears. 15 years on the road, and I'd dealt with my share of trouble. Drunk drivers, attempted hijackings, even a knife pulled during a dispute at a truck stop outside Memphis. But never a gun, never a corpse. "Hey man," I said, forcing my voice to stay level, pushing the words past the fear knotting my throat. "I was just checking if he needed help. I don't want any trouble." The gunman's face remained impassive, his eyes flat and emotionless in the harsh beam of my dropped flashlight. Predator's eyes, the kind that assess rather than see. "Get in your truck and drive," he ordered, gesturing with the barrel. "Now. And forget what you saw here." I nodded slowly, carefully. As I backed away, my flashlight beam swept across the dead man's exposed forearm. There, standing out against the pale skin, was a tattoo. A black snake coiled around a dagger, fangs bared. Something about it tugged at my memory, but I couldn't place it. "I'm going," I said, hands raised slightly at my sides. No problem. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to walk steadily toward my truck, conscious of the gun trained on my back. Only when I reached the driver's side door did I risk a glance over my shoulder. The gunman had holstered his weapon and was dragging the body toward the sedan's open trunk. The dead man's head lolled obscenely, his limbs flopping with the boneless quality unique to corpses. The killer worked with mechanical efficiency, handling the weight with practiced ease. Inside my cab, I fumbled the key into the ignition. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn it. The engine roared to life, but I didn't pull away immediately. Instead, I watched in the side mirror as the gunman slammed the trunk closed and wiped his hands on his jeans. He looked directly at my truck for a long moment before climbing into his sedan. The car reversed in a spray of gravel, executed a tight three-point turn, and accelerated away in the direction it had come from. Within seconds, the taillights had vanished into the darkness. I sat there, grip white-knuckled on the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't a hit and run or some drunken accident. This was execution, disposal, cover-up. I'd stumbled into something deadly. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I could drive away, pretend I'd never stopped, never seen the body or the man with the gun, but I knew I wouldn't sleep right again if I did. With a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. I gave her my location as best I could estimate, described what I'd found, and the man who'd threatened me. She told me to remain where I was. A patrol car would be there within 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes stretched into an eternity. I kept the engine running and the doors locked, watching the mirrors, straining to hear anything above the idle of the diesel. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of wind became the approach of the gunman, returning to eliminate the witness. Finally, blue and red lights pulsed in the distance. A patrol car pulled up, and a heavy-set deputy climbed out, hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. His cruiser's spotlight swept across my truck, momentarily blinding me. I stepped down from the cab, hands visible. "Deputy," I called. "I'm Donnell Hawkins. I'm the one who called it in." The officer approached cautiously. His nameplate read, Mason. He was older than I expected, probably pushing 50, with a weathered face and salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp. His eyes, though, were sharp and alert, missing nothing. "Mr. Hawkins," he said, voice neutral. "Want to tell me exactly what happened here?" I recounted the events, finding the body, the armed man, the tattoo I'd glimpsed. Mason's expression darkened at the mention of the snake and dagger. "You're sure about that tattoo?" he asked, suddenly intent. I nodded. Black snake wrapped around a dagger, on his inner forearm. Mason exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his face. "That's the mark of the Black Vipers," he said. "They're a motorcycle gang that moved into this area about 5 years back. Started as small-time drug dealers, but they've been climbing the ladder. Guns, protection rackets, maybe worse." He looked down the empty highway, as if he could still see the sedan's departing taillights. "If you've seen one of them dead, there's serious trouble brewing. Gang war, maybe, or an internal power struggle." Mason radioed in, requesting additional units and a forensic team. He took my full statement, examined the site where the body had been, and collected what little physical evidence remained. Bloodstains, a boot print in the soft shoulder, a cigarette butt that might or might not be related. "We'll need you to stick around locally for a day or two," he said. "There's a motel about 30 miles down in Winnemucca. You can hole up there until we follow some leads." I thought of my delivery deadline, the penalty clauses in my contract. "I've got a load to get to Reno by tomorrow afternoon." Mason's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Hawkins, you're the only witness to what's potentially a high-profile homicide. The Black Vipers don't leave witnesses. You stay at that motel, you call your dispatcher, and you explain the situation. We'll provide official documentation for your employer." I nodded, the reality of my situation sinking in. "Do you think he'll come looking for me?" The deputy's silence was answer enough. The Desert Palms Motel in Winnemucca was exactly what you'd expect. A single-story horseshoe of rooms facing a gravel parking lot, neon sign flickering in the pre-dawn darkness. The night clerk barely looked up from his paperback as I checked in, sliding a key attached to a plastic diamond across the counter. Room 1114 smelled of industrial cleaner masking decades of cigarettes. The bedspread was a faded pattern of southwestern geometrics, and the carpet was worn through near the bathroom door. I set my overnight bag on the veneer dresser and drew the heavy curtains closed before checking that the deadbolt and chain were secure. Sleep was out of the question. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, replaying the night's events. The dead man's face, waxy in my flashlight beam. The gunman's cold eyes, the snake tattoo. My phone rang just after 7, startling me from a fitful doze. It was Deputy Mason. "We found the sedan," he said without preamble. "Abandoned in a ravine about 15 miles north of where you spotted it. Wiped clean, no body." I rubbed my eyes, trying to process this. "What about the guy with the gun?" "No sign of him either, but we've got an APB out with your description." Mason paused. "How long were you planning to stay in Winnemucca?" I called my dispatcher. "They're rerouting another driver to pick up my load. I'm supposed to wait for further instructions." "Good. Stay put. We might need you to look at some photos, maybe do a lineup if we bring someone in." After hanging up, I ventured out for coffee and a greasy breakfast at the diner attached to the motel. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with bottle-red hair, smiled tiredly as she refilled my cup for the third time. "Passing through?" she asked, making conversation. "Sort of. Waiting on some truck repairs," I lied, not wanting to explain the truth. She nodded sympathetically. "Happens to a lot of drivers. Not much to do around here, I'm afraid." I spent the day in a limbo of anxiety and boredom, alternating between pacing my room and flipping through static-filled channels on the ancient television. By evening, the walls were closing in on me and I needed air. The motel parking lot was quiet. Just a few scattered vehicles, my rig, a couple of dusty pickups, an RV with Arizona plates. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in violent oranges and reds. I walked the perimeter of the property, stretching my legs, breathing in the cool desert air. That's when I noticed the car. A dark blue Dodge Charger, parked across the street at a closed gas station. It hadn't been there when I'd gone for breakfast. Something about it set off alarm bells in my head. I turned casually as if heading back to my room, then cut between two buildings, circling around toward the office. From there, I had a better view of the Charger. The windows were tinted, but I could just make out a silhouette behind the wheel. Someone watching the motel. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead as I slipped into the office. The same clerk from the night before was on duty, looking equally disinterested. "Is there a back exit?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He looked up, finally registering some curiosity. "Fire door at the end of the east wing." "Why?" "I think someone's watching the place, maybe waiting for me." The clerk straightened, suddenly alert. "You in some kind of trouble?" "Not by choice," I said grimly. "Can I use your phone? I need to call the sheriff's department." Mason wasn't on duty, but the deputy who took my call promised to send a patrol car immediately. I stayed in the office, positioning myself where I could watch the Charger through the Venetian blinds without being seen. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the gas station, lights flashing. The Charger's engine started immediately, and it peeled out, tires squealing as it accelerated away. The patrol car gave chase, both vehicles disappearing around a corner. I exhaled slowly, unclenching fists I hadn't realized I'd made. They'd found me. Somehow they knew where I was staying. The responding deputies took my statement and searched the area, but the Charger had vanished into the network of back roads. They insisted on checking my room before letting me return to it, and promised to maintain a presence in the area throughout the night. Sleep was impossible. I dragged the armchair in front of the door and sat there with the lights off, watching shadows move across the curtains whenever a car passed on the highway. My phone rang just before midnight. Mason again. "Hawkins," he said, his voice tight. "We've ID'd the victim from your description and the tattoo. Anthony Russo, goes by Tony. Mid-level enforcer for the Black Vipers." "That's good news, right?" I asked. "You're making progress." "It complicates things," Mason replied. "Russo was rumored to be skimming profits, maybe working with a rival outfit. If he was killed for betraying the club, they won't stop until they've eliminated everyone connected to the situation, including witnesses." "I only saw the body, deputy. I didn't see who killed him." "Doesn't matter. You saw the cleaner, the guy who disposed of the body. To them, that makes you a loose end." Mason paused. "I'm sending a car to bring you in. We can keep you in protective custody until we sort this out." 30 minutes later, I was in the back of a cruiser, my overnight bag beside me, heading toward the sheriff's station in Winnemucca. As we pulled away from the desert palms, I noticed a figure watching from the shadows of the ice machine alcove. A man in a dark jacket, face obscured. My stomach dropped. He hadn't been in the Charger. He'd been on foot, waiting, watching. "Deputy," I said urgently to the officer driving. "There's someone back there by the motel. I think he's one of them." The deputy glanced in his rearview mirror. "Where?" I turned to look, but the alcove was empty. The figure had vanished. "He was just there," I said, doubting myself now. "By the ice machine." The deputy nodded, but I could tell he thought I was seeing things, jumped up on nerves and lack of sleep. Maybe I was. Or maybe the Black Vipers had more eyes than I'd realized. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Station was a squat, concrete building that looked like it had been constructed during the Cold War and neglected ever since. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over dingy beige walls and worn linoleum. Mason met me in the interview room, a foam cup of coffee in his hand. He looked worse than I felt, eyes bloodshot, yesterday's stubble darkening his jaw. He'd been working straight through, I realized. "We've got a problem," he said, setting the coffee in front of me. The blue Charger was found abandoned 10 miles out of town, stolen 3 days ago from a casino parking lot in Elko. I wrapped my hands around the cup, seeking warmth. "So they're still out there, most likely, but we're closing in. We've identified your gunman from your description and some confidential informants. Name's Ray Mercer, former military, dishonorable discharge. He does cleanup work for the Black Vipers, very dangerous." Mason slid a photograph across the table. The man staring back from the mugshot was unmistakably the one I'd encountered on the highway. Shaved head, cold eyes, neck tattoos creeping upward like ivy. "That's him," I confirmed. "That's definitely the guy," Mason nodded, retrieving the photo. "We're coordinating with state police and the FBI's organized crime unit. They've had the Vipers under surveillance for months. Your testimony could be the break they need." "Testimony?" I echoed. "You mean in court? With Mercer there?" "Potentially, yes, but that's down the road. Right now, we need to keep you safe until we can bring Mercer in." "They put me in a cell. For my protection," Mason insisted. It was clean enough, with a thin mattress on a metal frame and a stainless steel toilet sink combination in the corner. Better than being found in a ditch with a bullet in my head, I supposed. 3 days passed in mind-numbing monotony. I ate bland meals on plastic trays, read old magazines left by previous occupants, and paced the small confines of my cell. Deputies came and went, always professional but clearly seeing me as an inconvenience rather than a person. All except Mason, who stopped by regularly with updates and the occasional book or newspaper. On the 4th morning, Mason arrived, looking grimmer than usual. "We've got to move you," he said without preamble. "We've picked up chatter that the Vipers know you're here. They might be planning something." "Planning what?" I asked. A cold knot forming in my stomach. "Could be nothing. Could be an attempt to silence you." Mason rubbed his face. "We've arranged for you to be transferred to Boise. You said that's your home base, right? Idaho State Police will take over protective custody until we can secure Mercer." 2 hours later, I was being escorted to an unmarked police sedan, a deputy on each side of me. The back parking lot of the station was empty save for a few official vehicles. The day was overcast, threatening rain, unusual for northern Nevada in May. We were halfway to the car when I heard it. The distinctive rumble of multiple motorcycles, growing louder by the second. Mason's head snapped up, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Get him inside," he barked at the deputies. "Now!" Before they could react, 3 motorcycles roared into the parking lot, riders clad in black leather. On their backs, I caught a glimpse of patches showing the same snake and dagger design I'd seen tattooed on the dead man. The lead rider raised something in his hand, a sawed-off shotgun. The blast shattered the window of the police car we'd been heading toward. Glass rained down as the deputies pushed me to the ground, shielding me with their bodies. More deputies poured from the station, weapons drawn. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the confined space of the parking lot. I kept my head down, concrete rough against my cheek, heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear the chaos around me. It ended as suddenly as it had begun. The motorcycles retreated, engines screaming as they accelerated away. Cautiously, I raised my head. One deputy was down, clutching his leg, face contorted in pain. Mason stood over him, radio in hand, calling for an ambulance. "Change of plans," Mason said grimly, helping me to my feet. We're moving you now, and we're not taking chances. You'll go in an armored transport with a full escort." The next few hours passed in a blur. I was hustled into a police transport van, sandwiched between two state troopers in tactical gear. We left Winnemucca with a police cruiser ahead and behind, sirens wailing. As we hit the interstate, a state police helicopter appeared overhead, tracking our movement. The journey to Boise took nearly 6 hours, every minute tense. I kept expecting more motorcycles to appear, more gunfire to erupt. But the escort did its job. We crossed into Idaho without incident and arrived at the state police barracks just after sunset. The Idaho State Police had prepared a safe house, a nondescript ranch-style home in a quiet suburb. 2 plainclothes officers would remain with me at all times. I was given a panic button to wear around my neck, and strict instructions not to go near windows or attempt to contact anyone from my former life. Days stretched into weeks. I gave formal statements, reviewed photos of known Black Vipers members, worked with sketch artists to create detailed renderings of what I'd seen that night on the highway. The FBI became involved, bringing with them a sense of gravity that even the state police couldn't match. In my 3rd week of protective custody, Mason called. His voice carried a mix of relief and caution. "We got him," he said. "Mercer picked him up trying to cross into California. He had a new identity all set up. Fake passport, the works." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Is it over then?" "Not quite," Mason admitted. "We need you to identify him in person, and eventually you'll have to testify. But the immediate danger has passed. The Vipers are scrambling, leadership in disarray. Seems Mercer was acting on orders from the top when he disposed of Russo. When do I need to identify him?" "Next week. We'll bring you back to Nevada under heavy escort." I hung up and stared at the wall, emotions churning. Relief, yes, but also dread at the thought of seeing Mercer again, of being in the same room with those cold predator's eyes, and beneath it all, a bone-deep weariness. I wanted my life back, my routine, the open road. The safe house felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in. I was a man accustomed to horizons, to the freedom of the interstate stretching endlessly before me. This confinement was its own kind of prison. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere out there, the Black Vipers were regrouping, planning, and I was caught in the middle, a random witness who'd stopped to help what he thought was an injured traveler. One act of basic human decency had upended my entire existence. The Nevada State Courthouse in Carson City was an imposing structure of granite and marble, its facade projecting permanence and authority. I sat in a side room, hands clasped to stop their trembling, waiting to be called in for the preliminary hearing. 6 months had passed since that night on the highway. 6 months of protective custody, official statements, photo lineups, and increasing isolation. My trucking company had been understanding at first, holding my job open, but as weeks turned to months with no end in sight, they'd reluctantly replaced me. I'd effectively become a non-person, no job, no home of my own, no contact with friends or family. The door opened, and a young assistant district attorney entered. Alicia Reyes was sharp-featured and serious, with the intense focus of someone who'd worked her way up from nothing. "They're ready for you, Mr. Hawkins," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Remember what we discussed. Just tell the truth as you experienced it. Don't embellish, don't speculate." I nodded, standing on legs that felt disconnected from my body. 2 U.S. Marshals flanked me as we walked down the corridor toward the courtroom. Security for the hearing was unprecedented. Metal detectors, armed officers at every entrance, plainclothes agents scattered throughout the building. The courtroom fell silent as I entered. It was smaller than I'd imagined, intimate almost, with wood-paneled walls and rows of spectator benches. Most were occupied by reporters and law enforcement. In the front row, Mason nodded slightly as I passed, and there at the defense table was Ray Mercer. He wore a suit that seemed too small for his frame, his muscular neck straining against the confines of a white collar. The prison haircut had grown out slightly, revealing dark hair kept brutally short. He watched me with the same flat, assessing gaze I remembered from the highway. I took the witness stand, was sworn in, and began my testimony. My voice sounded strange to my own ears as I recounted finding the body, described the tattoo, detailed Mercer's arrival and threats. Throughout, Mercer's expression never changed. He might have been watching paint dry for all the emotion he showed. The defense attorney, a sleek, expensive-looking man with silver hair and hand-tailored suits, tried to undermine my identification, suggesting the darkness and my fear had compromised my memory. But I remained certain. Some faces you don't forget. When the hearing concluded, the judge found probable cause to proceed to trial on charges of accessory to murder, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. Mercer was led away in handcuffs, but as he passed the witness stand, he paused, eyes locking with mine. "Nice seeing you again, trucker," he said softly, just loud enough for me to hear. Then he smiled, a small knowing curve of the lips that chilled me more than any threat could have. The marshals hustled me out through a side exit into a waiting SUV with tinted windows. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of a group of men watching from across the street. They wore ordinary clothes, but something about their stance, their watchfulness, marked them as vipers. "It went well," Reyes said from the front passenger seat. "Your testimony was clear, credible. With the evidence we've gathered since Mercer's arrest, we have a strong case." I barely heard her. My mind was still in that courtroom, replaying Mercer's parting words, that chilling smile. He wasn't worried about the charges. He knew something we didn't. The trial itself took place 3 months later. By then, the FBI's investigation had expanded, encompassing not just Russo's murder but a network of crimes connected to the Black Vipers. Additional charges were filed against Mercer: racketeering, conspiracy, multiple counts of murder. He'd been the club's primary enforcer, it turned out, responsible for at least 7 deaths. I testified again, this time before a jury. The courtroom was even more heavily guarded, the tension palpable. Mercer maintained his eerie calm, but several other defendants, high-ranking vipers who'd been swept up in the widening investigation, glared at me with naked hatred. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I was sequestered in a hotel under guard for its duration, allowed no contact with the outside world. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Mercer received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The other defendants fared similarly. Afterward, in a private meeting room at the courthouse, Mason shook my hand. He'd aged during the investigation and trial, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. "You did good, Hawkins," he said. "Without your testimony, none of this happens. The Viper's entire operation in Nevada and Idaho is dismantled." "What happens now?" I asked. "To me, I mean." Mason exchanged glances with an FBI agent who'd been instrumental in the case. "That's up to you," he said. "The immediate threat is contained. Mercer and the leadership are going away for life, but the organization isn't completely destroyed. There will always be remnants, sympathizers." "Witness protection," the FBI agent said, stepping forward. "We can give you a new identity, relocate you somewhere far from here. New life, new start." I considered it. Disappearing, becoming someone else. Leaving behind not just the danger, but everything and everyone I'd ever known. "Or," Mason added, "you go back to your life. We provide some security measures, check in regularly. But essentially, you'd be Donnell Hawkins again." "With a target on my back," I said flatly. Mason didn't deny it. "A smaller target, and one that will fade with time. These organizations have short memories when it comes to foot soldiers. They focus on immediate threats, immediate profits." I took a deep breath. "I want my life back," I said finally. "I've lost enough to these people. I won't let them take my identity too." 2 weeks later, I was back in Boise, in a new apartment with a security system linked directly to the police department. My old company couldn't rehire me. My position had been filled, but another outfit was willing to take me on, local routes only at first. Nothing that would take me near Nevada or areas known for Viper activity. That first night in my own place, I sat on the balcony, nursing a beer, watching the city lights. Every passing car made me tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I knew it would be like this for a while, the hypervigilance, the constant looking over my shoulder. But gradually, day by day, normalcy returned. I established routines, reconnected with old friends, started building something resembling a life. The authorities kept their word, checking in regularly, providing updates when necessary. Mercer's appeals were denied one by one. The Black Vipers, their leadership decimated, fractured into smaller, less organized groups. The threat didn't disappear entirely. I still took precautions, still varied my routes and routines, still kept my doors locked and my eyes open. A year after the trial, I was cleared to return to long-haul driving. My first interstate route took me through Wyoming and Montana, far from the territories the Vipers had claimed. Being back on the open road with the rhythm of the highway beneath my wheels felt like coming home. I still think about that night sometimes, about how a random decision to stop and check on what I thought was an injured traveler altered the course of my life. One moment of basic human decency leading to months of fear and upheaval. Would I do it again, knowing what would follow? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. The answer, I think, is yes. Not out of heroism or some misplaced sense of justice, but because that's who I am. That's who most of us are. When stripped to essentials, people who stop to help, people who can't drive past suffering. The highway stretches before me, endless and open. I keep my eyes on the road ahead, but I never forget to check the rearview mirror. Some lessons stay with you forever.